All right, if you have your Bibles, you don't have to turn very far. We'll get there momentarily. You can turn to Genesis 1. So it shouldn't take you very long to get there. But I'm excited about the next couple of weeks. I'm not sure how long this will take us, but I have the privilege of introducing us all to the next three studies or ologies in our systematic theology study that we're doing together. And that is, of course, man, sin, and salvation. I wanted to use the fancy words, but I figured I'd use the simple words. So the fancy words are anthropology, hamartiology, and soteriology. Those are the fancy words we'll explain and go on and so forth. But essentially what we're talking about here is the doctrine of man, mankind. That's men and women, not just men. So the doctrine of humans, the doctrine of sin, and the doctrine of salvation. These, of course, are easily lumped together, and it makes sense to keep them together just because they are a unit. Your understanding of humanity and humanity's problem will greatly influence how you understand that problem is remedied, how that problem is fixed. And I would also say that maybe you don't know this consciously, or maybe you've never really thought about this before, but your anthropology, your view of fellow human beings, so to speak, will greatly influence just how you view... I always forget that I have slides. Your anthropology will greatly influence your hamartiology and will affect your soteriology. So, an easier way of saying that is how you understand your place within creation, along with that of your fellow man, will greatly influence your view of man's problem and how that problem is remedied. And this is why this is relevant. This is why this is so important for us to consider, because all of these things go together, just like all of the things we've been studying so far in these ologies, these studies of systematic theology. All of them are building on one another, and each one influences and permeates and affects the other in really, really vital ways. And these disciplines are no less important than any of the others we've covered so far. They're vital to our understanding of who God is. They're vital to what we would say is our quote-unquote theology. And I think this is really important because even if you haven't thought about it before, you have an anthropology. You have a way in which you view fellow human beings that affects how, either you interact with them, how you think about them. Just think about your first reaction when you see a human being on social media. Either they're screwing up, either they're saying something dumb, either they're doing something online that generates a reaction. Where's that coming from? Maybe it's because they're doing something dumb, but also it's because, more likely than not, you have an anthropology that is also filtering that person's words, actions, so on and so forth. And so that what I'm trying to get us to see is that anthropology, that view of human beings that you have all around us, and we're surrounded by human beings all the time, may or may not be biblical, may or may not be how God has told us to interact or respond to our fellow man. Your view of human beings informs how you respond to them, and this is formed, of course, through information and or through experience. You have this view of other people, of others that are surrounding you, that is formed either by information that you've gathered, by things that you've read, or so on and so forth, or it's just by experience. I know that this person cannot be trusted because I've experienced opportunities to where I've been the victim of their mistrust, or so on and so forth. It's by experience. But what I really want to say and ask you is this, because anthropology is not one of the most ooh, this is exciting, we get to talk about humans. We got really excited when Pastor Eric was talking about angels and demons, and I understand that. It's really fascinating, it's really exciting. Humans is not quite as that doesn't get us excited. But I actually think that this is really extremely relevant for us. And I think it's relevant for us to consider all of these facets, especially all of these three together, man, sin, and salvation, because I think they're relevant for evangelism. Let me just take you to the text that we're going to be talking about a lot in this beginning portion. in the weeks to come. But of course, it's Genesis 1, 26 and 27, which is, of course, the creation of man within the creation account of Genesis 1. And notice what happens, or notice notice how this creation of man is described. Let's say it that way. Verse 26, then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Now, this is going to be one of those open-ended questions, and I make no apologies for asking it. What is one of the things, when you're reading these verses, what's one of the immediate things that stands out to you? There's no really wrong answer. I just want to, what's the thing that's jumping out, either from the page or from the screen? What's one of the things that's jumping out to you when you read this? Us. Oh, in verse 26? Yeah, that's a great point. This is, by the way, this is not part of this, but this is a great point. Notice all of the plural pronouns that appear here, which again are alluding to the Trinity. Let us make man in our image. Again, this is one of those, if someone is trying to convince you that the Bible doesn't convey the fact that God is 3 in 1, take them right here. Because this is exactly where we're going. This is God, Jehovah, having, we could call it a Trinitarian conversation. And he's saying, between the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, let's just make man in our image. And this is how man is created. It's a great point. This is a great place to take people if they want to question the Trinity. I would take them here, and I would take them Matthew chapter 3 when Jesus is baptized. But anyways, we're not talking about the Trinity today. But we can if you want to. What else stands out to you? Beard.
Speaking of not the Trinity, but a Trinity, verse 27 says the same thing 3 times.
Created man in his own image?
Created.
Yeah. That's a great point. It's the image. That's a great point. That it's included 3 times in verse 27. Created man in his own image, in the image of God, male and female, he created them. Anything else? Just trying to gauge. Yeah, Pastor Eric?
Yeah, that we're made in the image of God.
Yeah, that's the one I was going with. See, we're on the same
right.
wavelength. In our image. This, of course, is alluding to the idea, and we're going to explain this a little bit later. This is the idea that within you, within every single human being, is what is called the imago Dei, the image of God. Every human has been implanted, has been created with the imago Dei, the image of God, whether that person knows God or not, whether that person believes in Jehovah God from the Bible or not. That's kind of beside the point. The point is that human beings are created in the image of God. And I would say, so again, to bring this full circle, the reason why your anthropology is both doctrinally and evangelistically relevant is because every human being is an image bearer. So this isn't only important for doctrine, what you believe, but evangelism, how you go out and witness that doctrine, because doctrine that just stays with you, belief that just stays with you, that's pointless. Doesn't really do anything for anyone. Doctrine that's lived out, that's evangelism. When you're going out and you're living amongst fellow human beings, you can also understand them as fellow image bearers. And this then creates a whole new level of seriousness, of urgency, I think of care, of compassion and consideration, because that person that cuts you off in traffic is not just a jerk who wants to get to Chipotle before you. No, that's a fellow image bearer of God that also deserves your compassion and your kindness. And you could apply that same scenario to any other scenario in which you find yourself where you're frustrated with a human being. Especially the human beings we see online. You're scrolling, I can't believe what that person did. They are a human being. And as I will hopefully explain this morning, is that they're probably a human being that they themselves have a bad anthropology, which has then gone on and affected all of the ways in which they've gone into all kinds of crazy beliefs. The point I want to convey to you again this morning is that these studies of these ologies, man, sin, and salvation, of course, are greatly impactful for our daily life, how we view the people that we live with all the time. How can we not be tenacious or urgent with our testimony when we realize that our neighbors, our friends, those grocery store people that are around us were also made in the image of God. And I would say this, that with a proper biblical view of our fellow human beings around us and their problems, which is, of course, sin, that is going to help us be better equipped to not only understand them, but also understand, again, that the only solution, the only remedy for their problem is the gospel, God's salvation. So again, all of this is still gospel-centered stuff. We're going to get into some different places than we normally get into, but this is all very gospel-centered and all very, would say, relevant to where we are on a daily basis. So, a quick outline of where we're going to go. We're going to start out with anthropology. We're going to start out talking about talking about man himself, the creation of man, definitions. We're going to define all that. We're going to talk about man's origin. We're going to talk about man's place, and then we're going to talk about man's nature. And this is going to segue us easily into hamartiology, the doctrine of sin, because man's nature has been affected, tainted, it's been twisted by sin. So all of this is going to flow into one another as we keep going through this study. So that's kind of a quick overview of where we're going to go. Once again, I make no apologies for this. I'm going to turn your attention to the State of Theology survey. I always like to turn people to this only because it gives us a really amazing snapshot, as I've said on a couple of occasions, of where the United States specifically is. This survey, of course, I'll reiterate once again, is conducted by Ligon Ministries and Lifeway Research. Really responsible survey houses, if you will. They handle data information well, and both of them are very much in our same sort of Christian circles, if you will. But they conduct this survey every 2 years. I can't wait to see the 2024 one that comes out hopefully soon. But this is based on the 2022 survey results in the United States. They also do it in the United Kingdom, but regardless. So State of Theology survey number 8. So, by the way, there's a list of I think it's 30-something statements, and it's just a broad reaction from people of all kinds of different demographics. Statement number 8 says this: God created male and female. We are doing pretty good on this one. I'm really glad for this response. 98% of evangelicals agreed. 2%, not sure where they're going or what's happening with the other 2%. But we're going to call this a win. Based on other ones that I've seen out there, and especially based on the next one I'm going to show you. This is a win. We're doing pretty good here, and it's obviously hard it's obviously hard to disagree with the Bible when we just read verse 27. God created male and female. It's hard to get around this, and maybe that's where people are going. Number 27 is where a little bit more of the confusion comes about. So number 27, gender identity is a matter of choice, which this is, of course, a hot button issue, and we're going to be touching a little bit on this in a little bit later. But this is where our concerns for the state of Christian theology should come to the surface, because 37% of evangelicals agreed that gender identity is a matter of choice. And I think this just helps us understand in a quick snapshot that there's a lot of confusion both about the creation of male and female, and then also this new sort of wave of ideology in which men and women, and especially young women, or young men even too, are being influenced to quote unquote live out their true gender identity. There's a lot of confusion on that, needless to say. And I would say this, is that gender confusion, I would say, is a result of one's view of man, sin, and salvation getting out of whack. Because if you think about it, if we're going to kind of explain this a little bit, is the fact that all of these things are sort of connected with one another. If you're being taught all of these really insane ideas, that you were born in the wrong body, that you need to do something. That's an anthropological statement. you're making a statement based on your view of humanity when you're being either told or you're telling someone else that, hey, maybe actually you weren't supposed to be born a male, you are supposed to be a female. So your problem then is hamartiology, your view of sin, your view of man's problem isn't sin. Your view of man's problem then is what? Is the way in which you've been oppressed or repressed your true identity. And so then your salvation, your solution to man's problem is you need to go through this process in order for you to live out your truth. All of these things are connected to the same basic thing, that our fellow man's view of themselves is based on crazy solutions. It's based on information that they've gleaned, or perhaps even misinformation that they've been taught about who they are and about what is actually going to fix them. And of course, to me, this just makes me so incredibly burdened for the way in which young people, especially teenagers, are being influenced around the ideas of how to live out their truth, so to speak. And of course, all of this comes out of this movement that's I'm transgender, I'm non-binary, or what have you. All of this, I think, comes back to here. Their view of man, their view of humanity, their view of mankind's origins is out of whack, which means their view of mankind's problem is out of whack, which means they're going to get the solution wrong. The salvation that's being proposed to young men and women is you need to go through a transition. And I think that these are all just, again, false views of anthropology, hamartiology, and soteriology. And this is kind of a planned tangent to talk about a little bit about this, but this is, of course, coming off of the heels of a time period in which everyone this is that sort of postmodern relativistic truth. Your truth is relative to mine. Paul has his truth, and I have my truth, and my truth shouldn't inform Paul's truth, and his shouldn't overbear mine. That's sort of the paradigm that's been happening for a long time. When you have that idea that there is no set defined system or statement of truth, then what happens? Then you have all of this, well, essentially you have chaos. That's what happens. Then that's what all of this is downstream from. And I think that, I'll say this. One of the things that I want to convey too is that this should make us, I'll say it this way. This should make us angry when we hear about how young men and women are being influenced in this way. But I think more than anger, it should make us burdened. To me, that's what happens. Like, okay, so I watched. This is free. Natalie and I, when it was on Twitter a long time ago for free that one time. We watched that documentary put out by Matt Walsh in the Daily Wire, What is a Woman? I don't know if you've watched that. I would recommend it only because it might make you a little bit angry, but I think it should make you burdened. Really, that's what it did. Because you got to hear from the horse's mouth, so to speak, exactly what their indoctrination language sounds like. It's the indoctrination language of those who are pushing the agenda of the LGBTQ movement, of what they're trying to, what they're teaching, what they're sort of opening young people up to. And all of what it is going to do is just going to make you incredibly sad. But I think in a good way I'm not saying, hey, go home and cry and be sad, but I am saying be burdened for the way in which all of this is broken. What you're seeing is the brokenness and man's resistance and rebellion to who God is. You're seeing it on full display. You know when it talks about in Romans chapter 1 that God has turned them over to a reprobate mind? This is kind of the fruit of that. They pursued their own truth. Mankind has pursued his own ideas of God and who he wants to be, to the point where now we're reaching sort of the apex of all of that, in which man is assuming that he can be his own God to the point where he can change who he is. He can change his identity. And this is all downstream of all that. And I think my point is this, is that it's sad that all of this gets turned into political talking points. Every November, you have the certain candidates, and they're going to make political statements about different sort of things. When really, especially if you watch that documentary, the testimonies of these people that have gone through this and now regret it are some of the saddest stories you will ever read. They're some of the most excruciating testimonies of people who have bought in. They've bought into the lies of false anthropology, of false hamartiology, and false soteriology. And now when they're coming back out of it and they're sort of kind of staring you in the face through a screen, and they're telling you, man, I bought into all of this and it is not what it cracked up to be. What you're seeing is once again man's hope of salvation failing them. You're seeing the false hope of salvation by living out my truth fail. Why? Because that's not what man was created for. It goes back to we have to have a proper and biblical, I would say, understanding of who we are as humans, what our problem is, and how God has designed from the beginning of the world, from creation itself, to fix that problem, to remedy that problem. This is all within his determinate will and counsel. Tiffany, you had a question.
It's a 70% fail rate is what I heard.
Yeah, the fail rate is pretty small, is pretty large, and the repercussions are only going to get worse, and I don't mean to turn this into a talking point about this. I will say a lot of what it seems to me it's a huge mental health crisis. More often than not is what we are seeing, which again leads to bad solutions. When you're kind of feeding into that mental health collapse that's happening, but you're feeding it, you're nurturing it, instead of trying to actually fix it or help remedy it. Regardless, my point is this, is that when we see these people, we often might have reactions that are strong. We might have reactions that are very visceral, like, oh, I can't believe that. But more often than not, I would hope that we would, when we see folks who have bought into this, they don't deserve our hatred. They actually deserve our compassion. They deserve our mercy more than anything else. And I think that's sort of one of the things that I think is that we struggle with sometimes. And I should have put it up here, but Pastor Eric mentioned this when he was talking about angels and demons. When Ephesians 6:12, where Paul says, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. We wrestle against rulers, authorities, cosmic powers over this present darkness, or against the spiritual forces of evil and heavenly places. That's the fruit. All of this kind of stuff is the fruit of evil getting in the heart of man, and kind of, this is the fruit of it. This is the fruit of mankind living after the flesh. Remember in Galatians chapter 5 where Paul talks about, hey, are you living after the flesh, or are you living after the Spirit? Those who live after the Spirit by faith, they bear fruit that looks like this. And he talks about the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, kindness, etc. And then but before that, he contrasts that by talking about the fruit of living after the flesh, which is chaos, it's violence, it's hatred, it's vitriol, it's kind of this right here. And so we're seeing the fruit of all of that. So anyways, this is kind of, I'm saying all this because all of these things that we're talking about this morning, they are so incredibly timely and relevant to where we are. The general population's understanding of humanity is really far off base, and that leads them to make succeeding decisions on how to fix the problem that they perceive as the problem, and where they're going to go for that fix. And more often than not, it's either to some sort of man-made wisdom or to themselves. So anyways, what I want to do is convey and communicate a biblical anthropology, a biblical hamartiology, and a biblical soteriology. I want to show you what the Bible says about who you are, where we came from, what our problem is, and how God in his amazing foresight and wisdom and determination sovereignly chose to fix that problem. So anyways, that's what we're doing. So quick definitions. Anthropology, big Greek word, essentially just means words or discourses about man, just like logos is that word that means words or study. We often translate it study of, but essentially this is what it means: the study of man, words about man, or we could say words about humanity. That's what anthropology is. And so let's start, we're just going to kind of introduce this a little bit by looking at mankind's origins. And the thing that I want to convey, of course, is that mankind's origins aren't up for debate. They aren't really up for questioning. They are not up for redefinition. They're not sort of things that we need to be worried about in any sort of way, because the Bible tells us exactly where mankind came from. Again, verse 26, Genesis 1, 26 and 27. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. This is where we came from. You know, part of the quest for all of these other theories about the origins of the universe, many of the scientific endeavors that have defined humanity, that have won a lot of Nobel Prizes for the last several decades, are all sort of based out of the premise of trying to explain mankind's origins without the existence of God. Most of them are going to fit within that box. How can we explain where we came from and got here with everything that we see around us? Also, not only everything we see, but everything we know and feel about ourselves. How do we explain emotions? How do we explain humor? How do we explain culture? How do we explain art? How do we explain morals without the presence or the existence of an almighty creator and designer and God? That's where a lot of these come from. And I would say, essentially, we can spend some time on this, but really, essentially, all of these other theories don't have merit. We can walk through them if you want, and maybe we'll pick up there on the next time. But we can walk through, the gap theory, the day-age theory, that all those other theories of the way in which the world was created. Because I would say, too, if you're reading Genesis 1 and you're trying to... and I'm not going to say there has to be like a definitive standpoint in this, but you're saying that each of these days is 1,000 years and all that kind of stuff, that actually has implications going forward with what you believe about how the earth was started, which is to say the simple understanding, and it's not simple, but I think it's the most basic understanding, that these are literal 24-hour days, and God created man, and he created the universe within 24 literal hours. That's the best, and I would say the most reasonable and the most biblical explanation going forward for who we are and where we are, and all the ramifications of that. So again, I think it's also incredible that within this book that we know is the revelation of the Son of God, God's only Son, the revelation of the Savior, is also our reason for being. So this book isn't just a book that's all about God. It is, but we could say an ancillary or a secondary application is to show us where we came from and how we fit into that amazing story that God is constantly unfolding. It's the story of creation's redemption. Actually, I think I'm going to stop here, and we're going to jump into this because I want to jump into chapter 2 of Genesis, which actually talks about the image of God in us, actually in a way that actually doesn't even reference that. So I want to talk about chapter 2 verses. So I'm going to give you some homework. Because we're not meeting next week, because next week we have the church picnic. So come back on the 25th of August for part 2 of this, and come back with how would you explain what the image of God is? If you had to explain to someone and you would say, hey, we're all made in the image of God, what does that mean? and what does that look like? Come back with answers or ideas, and I would love to talk about that, because I want to talk about that because that's going to have huge ramifications going forward. But any questions or comments or things that that came to your mind while we are going through some of this morning? Yeah, Ken.
Yeah, I'm curious what Bible version that came out of Genesis 1.
This is the ESV.
So, that's ESV, okay.
Yeah.
NIV and NASB doesn't have us in there. It says
Oh.
God made it in His image, so it doesn't use the plural.
Interesting.
It doesn't have us or our. I thought NASB was one of the more accurate versions according to the original text.
Which,
The reason why I bring that up is because when you use plural us or our, we're not really identifying a gender for God. And therefore, when you get to the end of verse 27 where it says God made in His image, male and female, is this where some of the confusion is coming from? Right, I'm looking at this from an apologetic approach. If I had to defend the Bible against somebody that's indoctrinated with this gender identity stuff, is this where they're coming from, right?
Yeah.
Are they saying us, meaning that God is male and female?
well, and so if you want to open this can of worms, we can. God himself doesn't really have a gender. And that shouldn't be like this amazing statement, because if you just think about it, God is a spirit. He isn't defined by mankind, fleshly, earthly genders. That's why God can talk about himself in the Bible, both through, most often, 95% of the time, how is God the Father revealing himself? As a father. That's why why he is called the Father. But that's also why we understand God's love, like in places like Isaiah, through the love of a mother. Because God is a spirit, and it's insane that we would try to apply human genders to one who is a spirit, who is outside of our realm of existence. But that's the same argument that many will make who are buying into a lot of the gender confusion. They will try to kind of smash those realities. They're going to smash the spirit world into the we could say the human world and say, see, these things don't equate. Well, that's also because God is outside of our realm of existence, and these gender definitions don't apply because he is a spirit. Essentially, it's the same thing that Pastor Eric was talking about with angels. Angels themselves within the spirit world don't have genders. That's why he says there is no marrying and remarrying in heaven. But when they enter into this realm, they take on sort of forms that we could say quote unquote make sense. In which we as humans can interact. Like Genesis 18, God the Father comes, we could say God the Holy, or God the Son, we should say, comes down in Genesis 18 and interacts with angels. And he's interacting with Abraham. He's not just this amoebus light being. No, he comes down as a man. But I definitely understand what you're saying, because I've heard that rhetoric a lot, where they'll take a passage like this or others and they'll try to it's like reapplying something down here to define something up here. But that's starting from the wrong starting point. This is the defining point, and it comes down, not the other way. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? I don't know if that is, hopefully. But I've heard that rhetoric a lot. Eric, do you want to say something? You looked like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was going to add to that. The whole concept of like male and female is kind of, disregarded, and we're all, genders, whatever you want, is very similar. It's satanic, because even if you look at Baphomet, which is one of the cultural symbols, Baphomet is both, it looks like a male, but it also has female attributes. And it's showing that blending, and basically all Satan does is blurs the lines of God's reality. And exactly what Satan does, he's basically sowing doubt in these people's heads. Just like he did in the garden. Did God really say that? Did God really say you're male and female? Didn't he say that you're genderless when you leave here and you guys are going to be like the angels? And they'll start saying these things, but we live in this reality that male and female exist because God created us to procreate. And that's how he designed man to be manifested in this way, whereas the angels were all made immediately.
Correct.
So when you start denying that male and female thing, because we're going to be genderless later on, now you're starting to defy God's whole process for humanity. And again, the whole reason is it's just satanic, and these people don't even know it. That's why, like you say, we were not against flesh and blood, but spirits, because this ideology actually doesn't even come from humanity.
Yeah.
It comes from the evil one.
Correct.
And he's just trying to mess it up. But male and female is very important as far as Earth goes, and mainly because it's what God said.
Well, that's a great point. Another thing I think on your question too is that I've seen, you know, reels, TikToks or whatever, where they're like, oh, see, it says male and female, he created them, meaning, and we understand this as Adam because by this point Eve hasn't been created yet. But the whole point of this is kind of like that's a false presupposition on what this is trying to convey. Genesis 1 is like a big overbroad summary statement from Moses on how everything came into being. And then when he goes back into chapter 2, that's almost like you're zooming in. It's like you have this map and hey, here's everything, and here's how everything got to where it was. So Moses is, when he's finishing chapter 1, he's already assuming that you know that there's two genders in the world. There's two sexes. It's male and female. And yet when he zooms into chapter 2, he's like, wait, let's go back a second and let's zoom in to when God created man, because I want to spend some time on that. So at the beginning of chapter 2, he's like pinch and zoom on a map on your iPad, and he's saying, here's how that happened. So God didn't create Adam with female chromosomes and then, you know, made Eve from that. No, he made Adam a man, and then in his amazing ability, God took a rib out of Adam and made a woman. That's how it happened. There's no gender confusion here. This is a huge summary statement and then later detail. It's like he's backtracking. Moses is backtracking, so to speak, in terms of chronology. This is not chronological in terms of like, here's how everything happened, blah, blah. Anyways, hopefully you get the point there. Because I've seen that used in the same way. But that's not at all what Moses is conveying. That's not at all what he is trying to communicate. It's actually the exact opposite. So anyways. Questions? Yeah, Bill.
I look at this very simple. God created man and woman. When you're born, God is the creator.
Mm-hmm.
You're not born a man in a woman's body, or a man in a woman's body, or a woman in a man's body. God does not make mistakes.
No.
So you're calling God a liar, a forfeiter, when you're saying, I'm born a man, but I'm in really a woman's body. God did it. God created. God is all-powerful, all-knowing, does not make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So right away they're saying God made a mistake.
Yep.
So it's completely, in my mind, unbiblical, untruth.
And again, all of this comes out of the idea of not wanting to submit to authority. That's a really big thing that you'll find. Like, no one likes to submit to authority. It's like, I'm going to stand up to the man. Well, that's like a human quality, but also it's a quality that gets man into trouble. The idea that we don't want to submit to the authority of who God is, that's leading to all of this. That's the original sin, by the way. It's this believing the lie that we don't have to submit to the authority of who God is. We can make up our own. We can do our own thing. We can be like gods. It's all started from right there. That's where all of this mess started. But thankfully, as we're going to see, that's also where our solution was promised. So think about Genesis 2. Come back on the 25th. And have some ideas or answers for what is the image of God. What does that mean? And I look forward to more conversation. We're going to get into all of this a little bit more. This was just a kind of a segue, an introduction to what we're going to talk about. And we'll dive in more next time. All right, so this is part number 2 in this subsection of our Ologies class, which is covering 3 different ologies at once, if you can remember what they are. Who remembers what they are? Anyone remember? It's okay. It's been 2 weeks. I know how we get. We don't always remember all of the things. It's okay. I won't do a pop quiz. It's man, sin, and salvation. I should have put the other ones on another slide, but the fancy terms are anthropology, hamartiology, and soteriology. All 3 of these really go together as we're covering, and I'm just going to do sort of a quick recap of what we've been asserting so far, because I think the reason why it seems crazy to do 3 at once, but also I think it makes sense to do these three at once because they all go together. What you view, this is kind of what we kind of established. How you view who you are, your anthropology, along with other people who are also humans, will greatly influence your view of sin, what the problem is, what is mankind's issue, what is his problem, which also will affect how you view that remedy for that problem. So all three of these go together. How you understand each one will affect the other. And this is what we've been talking about a lot. So we started off with introducing anthropology. And who remembers what anthropology means? Or who wants to wager a guess? Ooh, I heard something over there. Yeah, Megan got it. Here we go. The study of mankind. So anthropos is Greek for man, and logos is word, which we've often covered many times in here, which in our English sort of frame of mind, you often translate or render as the study of. So the study of this, that, or the other thing. So anthropology is literally words about man, or the study of mankind. And this includes mankind's nature, mankind's culture, mankind's environment. All of that has to do with one's big, broad term, anthropology, how you view this huge study of human beings, of humankind. And the thing that we were really emphasizing last time, which is 2 weeks ago now, before the church picnic, was the fact that everyone, regardless of whether you've thought about this before or not, you have an anthropology. There's a way in which you view humankind, human beings, fellow people that are just like you. There's a way in which you view them that is either attained through information, attained through experience, and it may or may not be biblical. And that's why we're approaching this in this way. What is the biblical approach to anthropology? Well, this is where we started last time. Well, let me also make this statement too, that there's, as we spent a lot of time covering in the last session, there's very ginormous consequences if you start off on the wrong foot in your anthropology. That's where we were talking about a lot of the movements that are driving our current culture. Where do they stem from? Yes, we can say sin. Yes, we can say evil influences. But it also is fruits of the fact that mankind has started off on the wrong foot. They've gotten off on the wrong sort of understanding of who they are, of who created them, and all those sorts of things. And that's what we're going to spend a lot more talking about this morning. So, biblical anthropology, as we asserted just briefly, is clear right from the jump. We don't have to wonder much about where to start. It's clear from the very beginning. Of course, the origins of man is right there in the very first chapter. So let me just read those verses. We're going to spend a lot of time in Genesis over the next couple of weeks, but especially this week and next. Look at Genesis 1, verses I'm sure you've heard many times before, but we're going to kind of cover them even more this morning. So Genesis 1:26 and 27, this is the origins of mankind. We said that a biblical anthropology will include statements about mankind's origin, mankind's nature, mankind's place within nature, and this kind of gives us all of that in one go. Verse 26, really famous verse, then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image, and the image of God he created him, male and female, he created them. If you want to really digest what we're going to be covering over the next couple of weeks, it's kind of this right here. We're just kind of unpacking and jumping off from this in a bunch of different places. This tells us mankind's origins, mankind's place, mankind's nature, his position, his status within creation, the fact that there's two genders that were created right from the very beginning, that this was always within God's mind, this was always within the plan, this was always the design that he had for human flourishing. It's all right here. There's no question when we open the Bible about what is appropriate in terms of a biblical anthropology, a biblical statement of who human beings are and the ramifications of that. And of course, the big key here is that God puts all of this front and center so that we don't have to question the fact of where we came from. This is kind of where we left off, which is the fact that we didn't evolve. All of these other ways in which we understand mankind's origins, they're kind of blasted away by what is stated here. There is a sudden creation, but it's not sudden in terms of it's just random or accidental. There's very much an intentionality here. We're going to get into that a little bit later too. There's an intentionality, there's a purpose, there's a design, there's all of these plans that God had in mind when he created human beings, and is right here in front of us. So we don't have to question. We who would say we trust and believe in who God is, we believe in Jesus Christ the Savior. When you say that, you're also affirming, likewise, if you're affirming the Scriptures, the fact of where you came from. It's not a big question. It's not a huge sort of uncharted waters. We came from the infinite wisdom of God. And a big implication besides all of this, of course, is the fact that here we have that phrase repeated a couple times where God says, that we could say the Godhead says, God the Holy Spirit, the Father, and the Son speak amongst themselves, and they say, let us make man in our image. So we have this idea of the image of God being placed within humanity, which is also called the Imago Dei. This is kind of what I left you with 2 weeks ago. If hopefully you did your homework, maybe you did. I'm not going to give you a pass or fail grade here, but who spent some time thinking about what does it mean that we're made in the image of God? What does that mean? How would you define that? If someone came up to you and said, what does it mean that we're made in God's image? What would you say to them? Pastor Eric has an answer, but does anyone else have an answer?
If I wasn't here 2 weeks ago, can I get out of the homework?
Yeah, we'll let you pass. No, I'm just kidding. Anyone else want to venture a guess? Pastor Eric's going to guess.
That's right.
Well, he's going to make a statement.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. We'll see. I would say the image of God encapsulates a spiritual, free-willed being with creativity.
Well, that's a great answer. There's a lot of implications with the Imago Dei, with the image of God, and I think that's a huge one. It's this idea that we were created for spirituality, that we also reflect our Creator in the terms of we also are creators in a sense. We don't create out of nothing per se, but we have this drive to create. And that can take different forms. It's not just like music or art. There's other ways in which that happens. And I think that's God-given. That's God instilled. That's divine. Any other, there's not I won't say there's no wrong answers, but I'm not looking for one specific answer because we're going to unpack this a lot. Anyone else want to venture a guess of what it means that the Imago Dei is residing in us? Oh, we need some more coffee. Oh, Jade's going to answer.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, this Bible has thoughts.
No.
I thought
She's not going to cheat. She's going to give you
this
things.
is
Yeah, that's-
something that I thought was interesting, different than what you said. So,
Yeah.
It says the passage does not specify in what way mankind bears God's image, a representation or likeness, just both referring to something made after the pattern of something else.
Yes. That's going to be important for a point I'm going to make later. The pattern and likeness, keep that in mind. So, really quick, I'm going to run through 3 different views of the Imago Dei. There's 3 ways that many have sort of categorized. These are, you can kind of think of them as big buckets in terms of how would you define the image of God in us. The first kind of view is what's here listed as the substantive view. So it's this idea that God's image in us is sort of made up of certain qualities or characteristics that make us human. You can think of this as the fact that humans, we have the ability to reason, to create, to express logic. We have this innate sense of morality. We have this idea, as Eric mentioned, we have this drive for creativity. All of that goes into this idea that there's this divine, we could call it spirituality or substance that God has imbued within humanity that reflects His image. You can see this just compare. Look, when a lot of people want to like try to like even the playing field when it comes to the animal kingdom and human nature. So they're like, look at these bees. Look at how awesome they communicate. Look at how smart they are. Those are instincts. That's not the same as reason or logic. And yes, they're communicating, and yes, they are communicating within their kind, but there's no equation of the fact of humans speaking non-verbally and also bees using their bodies to speak in rhythmic patterns. There's no equation of the two. One is instinctual. It comes from within their nature. One is one that another is something that is just instilled within humanity by God himself. One is so perfectly designed. Just think about the fact that human beings have developed languages, and languages evolve over time. If we tried to speak Middle English, let alone Old English, it would just seem like a foreign language to us. Also, the fact that human beings also have, throughout history, have been speaking without speaking, as I said. The idea of nonverbal cues, the way in which we can emote and we can express emotions, all of that is related to this idea that there's this divine substance as a view in which we can understand the Imago Dei. Another one is to understand the Imago Dei through relationships. So there's this relational view. It's this idea that when human beings relate to one another, whether that's through a husband and a wife, or a son and a daughter, or siblings, or a parent and a child, or whatever, friends, regardless of what that relationship looks like, that's this idea that there's something divine happening. Human beings relating to one another. One theologian puts it like this, that the image is not an entity or a substance that a human possesses so much as the experience that is present when a relationship is active. That comes from Milton Erickson's Christian theology. And I would say most modern theologians, if you were to look at the ones from like the 20th century, they would kind of hold to the relational view. They would kind of, most of them would hold to this view. A third one is to see it as what we call the functional view, which is the idea that we see God's image as mankind does certain actions, as mankind sort of asserts his dominion over creation, as it says here in Genesis 1, that he has dominion over all of these different facets of nature. So we see God's image in terms of what mankind does. So again, Erickson kind of summarizes this for us. As God is the Lord of all creation, humans reflect the image of God by exercising dominion over the rest of creation. Let me just say, I don't think we have to separate these into different buckets. I think all of them are the same. All of them are true. I think all of this goes into it. Which is just to say, that's why the Imago Dei is something that's hard to articulate in terms of just a one-sentence thing, because it includes this amazing sort of instilling of God for morality, for justice, for all of these things that we are striving towards. Also, we can see it when humans can relate to one another. I think a great example of this, by the way, was what happened on Wednesday when we had a whole row of a family that was just visiting, passing through. They were staying at Knoebels, and they just happened to want to come to our church on a Wednesday night, so they came and they got to see one of our amazing meandering rabbit trail discussions on a Wednesday night. And the amazing fact is that, and yes, there's like a spiritual quality to this because we knew that they were Christians, but also the fact that there was immediate kinship with this family. We'd never met. We'd never seen them before. They were from Cape May, New Jersey. But anyways, that's an amazing sort of example of this relational idea of the Imago Dei. Like suddenly right there in front of this row, there's strangers, but yet as we're praying, we got to pray with them. And it was amazing, the idea of a relationship with these people without even knowing them. Relational view. Also, the functional view. Yeah, mankind was created to perform certain functions. We're going to see that in a little bit. But the idea that work is part of the curse, that's not technically true. Adam was put in a garden to tend it, to keep it. The curse part was the labor that came along with that work, the sweat and the grit that came along with all of that having to happen. So anyways, all of these are true. All of these, I wouldn't try to separate them you can meld them all together. All of this is included in what it means to be made in the image of God. But I think the biggest implication, at least in my mind, how I understand the Imago Dei, I think is best illustrated by this, that we aren't our own authority. I think when we say that we are made in the image of God, I think this is a huge statement to make, which again has a lot of different ramifications and consequences if this goes awry. I think the fact that we were created in God's image not only tells us that there is a creator, yes, because someone's creating us, but it also tells us that we have an owner, which is another huge important statement to make, that there is someone who is over us, who is able to speak to us, to give us direction, to give us instruction, to give us correction and whatnot. And a great example of this comes from Romans chapter 9. So I'm going to put it up here. You can turn there too if you want. Romans 9, 20 and 21. Paul is within this great passage in Romans chapter 9. He's talking about a lot of different things, but notice what he says here. He says, "But who are you, O man, to answer back to God? What is molded say to its molder, why have you made me like this? Has the potter no right over the clay to make out of the same lump one vessel for honorable use and another vessel for dishonorable use?" So the big sort of keys that should jump out to us is this idea that there is something that is molded has a molder. This idea that there's a potter who is manipulating and forming and fashioning clay in front of him according to his design, according to his purposes, according to his, yes, creative vision for what that pottery is going to eventually be and how it's going to function. There is whatever is molded has a molder, which is not only in terms of it being created, but also in terms of ownership. Just as clay, again, as Paul is here writing, just as clay has no right to sort of refuse or refute its potter, whatever the potter does to it, so does man, which the same word for man is that Greek word anthropos, has no right to answer back. Did you notice that word? Answer back or contradict what his maker has made. That seems like a crazy notion to want to resist. Like it's crazy for us because clay has no sort of life force in it. But that's the image that Paul is sort of conveying to us. That this is how preposterous it is for man to sort of scream back up at God. Why have you made me like this? I can be my own authority. That's as insane as pottery trying to scream back to its potter. And this answer doesn't just come from Paul. This comes from all over the New Testament. Isaiah 64:8. You'll notice that same image. "But now, O Lord, you are our Father, we are the clay, and you are our potter. We are all the work of your hand." This is a summary statement, but also an amazing assertion of who we are as human beings. Yes, we're made in the image of God. What does that mean? That we are his pottery. We are the fashioning of his hands. He is our potter. Another prophet, Jeremiah, uses a similar image. "Then the word of the Lord came to me. O house of Israel, can I not do with you as this potter has done, declares the Lord? Behold, like the clay in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, O house of Israel." Again, what does that imply? Ownership. It implies authority. It implies governance. And it also implies will. So here we have this really important point that according to biblical anthropology, this is the assertion that we have an authority to answer to. And this, of course, is a point of controversy by many because who likes to answer to authority? And maybe you're like, I love that. I love answering to authority. And you might be an exception. I think there's within us, and we're going to get to this because of our sin nature. So this is down the road. But because of our broken, sinful nature, we have a resistance to authority, whatever that authority is. Whatever form or fashion that takes, there's somewhat of an inbred, innate resistance to the idea of you can't tell me what to do. And a bad anthropology, a bad understanding of humankind, of human beings, is going to assert that, okay, in light of the fact that I don't like authority, I can make my own. this then gets back to what we were talking about last time. The idea that I can be my own authority, which means I have autonomy over my body in terms of whether I'm a male or a female. That is just a preposterous sort of assertion of your own authority. And that's the point of what biblical anthropology is supposed to do. It is supposed to instill in us, in the fact that all of this was God designed, not sort of human created. And so, no wonder now there is this sort of shimmering level of chaos and confusion within society, within culture. It's because our biblical anthropology, well, we don't have one. Our anthropology is just out of whack. And why? Because we have asserted that we are our own authorities. We are potter, we are just clay, assuming the fact and asserting the fact we can mold ourselves. We can do whatever we decide is best. Without any sort of stable or absolute sense of authority, humans are left to make one for themselves. And my question to many would be, how's that going for you? Because it's not going well. Just scan a couple of news headlines and that'll be very clear. And all of this is to say, I think it's crucial that we understand our origins biblically, because this gives us the basis for everything else. Authority implies ownership. It implies this idea that you are created, but you are also governed by an authority. And our natural instinct is to sense that is restrictive. But actually, the whole point of the Bible is to show us that biblical anthropology includes, yes, a divine authority that is not restrictive. It's relieving. It's gracious. This is leading to your flourishing. Remember the authority that God asserted to Adam and Eve in the garden? You can eat of everything except that one. He wasn't holding anything back from Adam and Eve. He wasn't confining them to a certain little portion and saying, I'm going to save the best so that you can't have the best. He was giving them everything. He was giving them a sense of, yes, authority, and he was giving them a sense of direction, and he was giving them an opportunity to trust in him and who he is and his word for them, that everything is up for grabs, except this one thing. And what is our natural thing? I want that thing, because you've told me I can't have it. It's like we want the thing that says, no, do not climb, or no, do not take, or no, do not taste. We want that thing precisely because we have that law that tells us don't do that thing. But the point, what God was trying to give them, everything is up for grabs for you. Everything is available. Literally, the world was their oyster, but they just wanted that other thing that they could not have. The idea is, again, authority, ownership, but it's a loving, relieving authority. This idea that we have a creator and an owner. And I think this is kind of what it means that God's image is in us, that we are created in the image of God. This, I think, is the biggest implication of the Imago Dei. And to prove that, I actually want to go to the Gospels. If you have your Bible, turn there just so you can see it, but also I'll have the verses up here. Matthew chapter 22 is vital, I think, to understanding this concept of image, likeness, ownership. This is an amazing little story. Matthew 22, verses 15 through 17. The word of the Lord says this, and the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him with his words. So right away, we see an instance in which the Pharisees, those like Disney villains of the Gospels, are trying to mess Jesus up. They're coming to him with a question that's not really genuine. They're coming to him with something, some sort of plot to entrap Jesus in his words. Verse 16, and they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Which is an interesting assertion of what they think of Jesus' ministry so far. And then they say in verse 17, tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? This is that famous interaction with Jesus and these Pharisees and a bunch of Herodians too here, where they kind of approach Jesus with this malicious question about taxation. And of course their question is more of a trap. Are you going to say we can pay taxes? And there's lots of implications for that, but we don't have time to get into. But so Jesus, I love how Jesus ignores their question though. Because they asked him about taxes, and he kind of, as it says, he's aware of their malice. He's aware of the fact that they're trying to trap him. If he says one thing, that will make this certain crowd mad. If he says another thing, that'll make this other crowd mad. Verse 18, but Jesus is aware of their malice. He's aware of everything that they're trying to do. Said, why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax. And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, whose likeness and inscription is this? And they said, Caesar's. Then he said to them, therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. I want you to notice those phrases, things that are Caesar's, things that are God's. According to Jesus, he's asserting this idea that ownership was indicated, again, by likeness and inscription. The coins, if you saw them, they found some from the 1st century. It's a little coin, and it's embossed with the image of Caesar's face right on it, like we would have a nickel or a dime or a quarter, whatever. Therefore, that embossing, that inscription, that likeness of Caesar's face on that coin indicated that they belonged to Caesar. They were his. He was their owner by right of authority. And the fact that he was Caesar. It didn't matter anyone's feelings on it. It didn't matter that these Pharisees were trying to make Jesus trip up, or you have the zealots who were like, well, I don't like Caesar, so we don't have to pay taxes. That was kind of beside the point. Jesus was making a blanket statement. Here, whose image is on this? Whose inscription is on this coin? Well, then it belongs to him. And I think this is the great point of what he's making, is that resemblance represented ownership. Rendered to Caesar's, what is Caesar's? Again, by likeness and inscription. And the point is this, is that, here, I'll just go through this really quick so you can have all this. Likeness is this incredible word here. It's the Greek word icon, but it's also the same word for image in Genesis 1. So in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, often alliterated by LXX or Septuagint, when you see that, that's a Greek version of what was Hebrew, because Old Testament written in Hebrew, except for Daniel, Aramaic, that's beside the point, but mostly Hebrew. And when they translate into the Greek, this word is the word in our passage, Genesis 1:26. So we can read. So again, now read it with that in mind. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. So God created man in his own image. Think about the coin. The coin bears the image of Caesar. And in the same frame of mind, we can understand what Jesus is saying, I think, very clearly, that so too does humanity bear the image of God. It's an inscription of ownership, of likeness, of who you actually belong to. Genesis 5:1 includes the same reference. This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. So now we are, again, being able and drawn into this amazing sort of statement of biblical anthropology. Just as coins bear the image of the one who owns them, so are we image bearers of our Creator and Owner. And we carry out that image through those other things that we talked about. Creativity, logic, relationships, in terms of how we accomplish our roles, our vocations. All of that is sort of melded together in this beautiful statement of what it means to be made and to live in the Imago Dei. One of my favorite commentators, Alexander MacLaren, a Scottish guy from the 1800s, he says, "This man's destiny for God is unmistakable. Whose image and superscription hath it?" He's commenting on this passage we just read in Matthew 22. Said Christ about the coin. "Caesar's, then give it to Caesar. Whose image and superscription hath my heart? This restless heart of mine, this spirit that wanders on through space and time, homeless and comfortless, until it can grasp the eternal. Who are you meant for? God. And every fiber of your nature has a voice to say to you if you listen to it." This is the great point here. That you were created for God. You're created to be worshipers, to be cultivators, to be those in whom that are representing who God is. And his image in us is this imprint on us, on our souls, on our hearts, on our lives, of who we belong to. And of course, as we're going to see, that image gets broken and fractured. And part of the gospel, by the way, is the repairing of that image. I'm kind of jumping ahead, but Romans 8:29, that we are conformed into the image of God's Son. It's restoring the image of God in us. That's what the good news is the restoration back to how we were originally designed to live and function. It's a restoration of God's image in us. That's why, again, you can read some of the prophets, I think especially of Ezekiel, when he's talking about the restoration of all things. I think it's in chapters like 36 and 37. He at one point refers to the fact that things will go back to the way in which they were in Eden, which includes the image of God and man being restored, being repaired. This is part of the good news. This is part of what it means to preach the good news. So the Imago Dei, the image of God in us, is a token of who we belong to. We don't belong to ourselves. We aren't our own authorities. We aren't the captains of our own fate. We belong to God. He's our owner. And whether you resist that or whether you are finding relief in that, it doesn't change the authority. God is just as much the owner of all of us here in this room as he is of everyone who disbelieves in God. You know what the difference between both realms is? In here, God is our Father. Outside of the covenant of faith, those who don't believe in Jesus Christ as their Savior, the one who repairs God's image in them, God's still their owner, but he's more of an authoritarian judge rather than a father. See, again, the good news, the judge becomes our Father. What an amazing fact that part and parcel with the good news is not only the reparation of the God's image in us, but the fact that God's relationship is now one of Father and Son. We are God's sons and daughters. This is all included within this great fact of the image of God. Just a couple. Well, yeah, I'll just make this and then we'll be done. Isaiah 29:16 is again another reference to this idea of pottery, clay. You turn things upside down, Isaiah says. Shall the potter be regarded as the clay, that the thing made should say of its maker, he did not make me, or the thing formed say of him who formed it, he has no understanding? Again, he's alluding to this idea that it's preposterous for the clay to sort of rebuff, to sort of rebuke its own potter. It's nonsensical. But I also think the great point here, back in Isaiah 29:16, is just the fact of formed. Because just as potters have their own, you always see on paintings a little signature at the bottom, or sometimes on pottery they'll put it on the bottom of the piece of pottery. Potters have signature, or even in just their style. When me and Ali did that pottery class a couple months ago, I think that was for our anniversary, but we went there down in Denver, and there was a guy who was just, the teacher's class was just amazing. He was just like, whoop, and he did the thing, and like me and Ali are struggling like out the wazoo, and there's another person who, there's just, yeah, it didn't look that good. A lot of fixing on that other, I had a lot of fixing too, don't let me mistake you. But anyways, it was amazing to see just what his hands were able to do with that clay in just a matter of seconds. He would teach us this, skill or whatever. But even besides the skill, besides all of his experience, there was a noticeable difference in the pieces of pottery, not only because we were inexperienced, but because he puts his own signature just in the way his hands were manipulating the clay. The same idea here. The potter has his own signature or form by which he forms the clay. Same with God. That's what this word form is kind of implying. It's this Hebrew word yetzar. It's the same word for potter itself in Jeremiah 18, that passage we read earlier. So we have this understanding then that a potter is a former. He's a fashioner of clay. And so we could say this, just as a potter is a former or fashioner of clay, so too is God the former or fashioner of man. And that's not just kind of pulling out of thin air. Genesis 2:7. Then the Lord God formed, same word, the man of dust from the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature. this, we're going to stop here, but this is a huge statement to, and I think a huge thing for all of us to recognize. The fact that God is our creator, he's our fashioner, he's our former. He is the one who designed all of humanity the way that it is. He designed it for himself, for his own glory, which is just this amazing thing that he designed us for this. But this, again, fills us with a sense of ownership, of purpose, of this loving authority that God has instilled in us, and that also is now being repaired through his Son, Jesus, who, by the way, if you want to continue going on about Christ, and we covered Christology a couple weeks ago, or months ago now maybe, but remember we said that Jesus is the express image of God. All of that is included in this idea of the image of God. So anyways, any thoughts or things that conjure up to you? Yes, Greg.
You were talking about God with Adam and Eve in the garden. It made me think about a clip of a sermon I saw one time that was talking about parenting young children. And other than the basic human needs of food and water, a young child needs three major things from a parent. It's unconditional love, a parent willing to give unconditional love, and boundaries. And God gave that to Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
And yet they broke the boundaries.
Yeah.
Just as children, we set boundaries and they're going to break it. But
Yeah.
it's just like the behavior of humans, being so much like how God designed.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point. And that you can kind of apply that grid over Genesis 2 and 3, and you can understand, it helps you understand what was going on, because that is the devil's deception. He was getting Adam and Eve to doubt the authority, but also the goodness of God. He was focusing on the restricted parts rather than on everything that was given to them out of grace. Hey, here's everything. And he's like, no, what about that one thing? God doesn't want you to have that one thing. That one thing is the thing. And again, that helps us understand the deception there, which we'll unpack in future weeks. Any other thoughts? Okay, well, we're going to pick up right here. We're going to get into Genesis chapter 2 a lot more, especially with the idea of how man is made with mind, body, and soul, those types of things. And then we're going to get into mankind's nature, and then that'll lead us into our study of sin, hamartiology, because of course we know that mankind's nature now, as it's presently concerned, is broken, is tainted, is corrupted by sin. So we're going to talk about that, and that'll lead us right into how that nature gets repaired and restored through the gospel of salvation. So. All right, we are in, you can turn your Bibles to Genesis 1 and 2 again. We're going to be there, but we're also going to be going to a ton of places this morning, as I'm hoping to somewhat wrap up, in a way, the first part of this sort of three-part subsection of our Ologies series, which is all about man, sin, and salvation. Anthropology, hamartiology, and soteriology. This is what we've been going through. We're making our headway through this. And Lord willing, we're going to be closing out this first part of this little subsection, which is anthropology, the doctrine of man. And we've been covering a lot of ground here. We talked a lot last time about the image of God, the Imago Dei, and what that means. And essentially, this is kind of our premise for what we've been going throughout this little bit of this series, which is how you view who you are will greatly influence your view of sin, which will also affect how you view the remedy for sin. That kind of covers and encapsulates why all three of these different subsections of these doctrines are being sort of smushed together, because each one affects and informs the other. So again, last time we talked a lot about the image of God, the Imago Dei, and what that represents, and how we were created in the image of God. We concluded by saying that the image of God is sort of best understood or described by this token of who we belong to. And if you keep your finger in Genesis, but go to Matthew chapter 22. And I'll just read this verse just for sake of getting us into what we spent a lot of time covering, which was this section where Jesus uses this illustration of a coin to, I would say, make a really profound statement about our identity, about the image of God. So Matthew 22, verse 21, this comes at the end of that little back and forth he has with these Pharisees, and he says this regarding, well, let's all back up. Let's do verse 18 where it says, "But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, 'Why put me to the test, ye hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax.' And they brought him a denarius, and Jesus said to them, 'Whose likeness and inscription,'" those are really important words, you should highlight or circle those if you're a person who likes to write in your Bible, "is this?' And they said, 'Caesar's.' And then he said to them, 'Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's.'" So again, here I think the point that Jesus is making is that resemblance represents ownership. And this, of course, is tied to these coins. Remember, these Pharisees are trying to question Jesus, hey, should we pay taxes or should we not? And he just shows them a coin, hey, this coin bears the resemblance of its owner. And he uses the same words, likeness, inscription, that are found in Genesis. That's where we get, well, I forgot I had this in here. That's where we get what we're talking about when we're talking about the image of God. The literal image of Caesar was imprinted on those coins. Therefore, Jesus says they belong to him. And you can think of the same thing, that the image of God is imprinted upon us, so it represents who we belong to. We belong to him. And of course, we talked about what that image might involve. It involves either the things that we are doing, the ideas of dominion as it talks about in Genesis 1. It talks about relationships. It talks about the idea that we as human beings have a capacity for intellect, for knowledge, for reason, for creativity. All those things, we don't have to separate one or the other. It's all of that smushed together. That's what I would say is helpful to understand what it means that we are made in the image of God. But just as a coin bears the image of the one who owns them, we are image bearers of our Creator and our relationship. And as we spent a lot of time last time also noticing, is that this is best, I think, represented by this image of the potter and the clay. We sat down on this verse at the very end, that where the prophet Isaiah says, "You turn things upside down. Shall the potter be regarded as clay, and the thing that made should say of its maker, he did not make me, or the thing formed say of him who formed it, he has no understanding." And this again is super critical for understanding this idea of mankind's origins, the way in which he was created, and the way in which God created him with purpose and intentionality. And here this idea of forming is really, I think, really key. It has this idea, this is kind of where we ended, this idea of a potter forming a lump of clay into a piece of pottery, something super amazing and beautiful that has function and purpose, that is created with design and intention. He also, the potter, whether he's doing it intentionally, where he's signing his name on the bottom of it, or just the way in which his technique is, he leaves his signature on that piece of pottery. And I use the reference from when Natalie and I were when we were doing pottery this past summer, and the idea that is that the potter who is teaching us, who was running that class, you could tell a significant difference. He had a signature to the way in which he was forming that pottery. You could think of the image of God in the same way, that this is God's signature on us, that we belong to him, that we were formed by him. And I think this word formed is pretty amazing also. It comes from the Hebrew word yatzar, and it literally means potter. So it's the same word that's found in Jeremiah 18, which is sort of a parallel reference to Isaiah 29. Jeremiah 18, 5 and 6, "Then the word of the Lord came to me, O house of Israel, can I not do with you as this potter has done? Declares the Lord, behold, like the clay in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, O house of Israel." That word potter in both of those instances is the same word formed, which helps us get a clear image in our mind of both of these passages, how they connect, and how they illustrate this beautiful idea of being formed in the image of God. So we come to this conclusion, That just as a potter is a former or fashioner of clay, so too is God, the former and fashioner of man. And this is important too because of this verse, Genesis 2:7. Then the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature. Formed, same word. Same word as before, that Hebrew word yetzar, which means former, fashioner. And again, this is, if you're in Genesis, just keep your finger there. We'll spend a lot of time in Genesis this morning, as we have for the past couple weeks. But Genesis 2:7 is, I think, a pretty amazing little section. Of course, it details the creation of man, and it details the fact that man's creation is not accidental. We've kind of passed over that. I didn't want to bog us down into repudiating the theories of evolution, because even modern scholars and scientists have begun to question just mathematically the ideas that evolution is pretty much mathematically just obsolete. Not that it's not worth our time, because lots of church history, at least in the 20th century, involves battling evolution. But I would just like to say that there's pretty obvious evidence from Scripture that is not how mankind was created. And this, I think, is the best example. When you zoom in on chapter number 2, I think this is what helps us understand mankind's place and origins. Because again, as we've noticed before, chapter 1, we zoom through the days of creation pretty fast. God created this, and then the next day, and then God created this, and so on and so forth. And he's putting stars in place, and he's just molding mountains out of the landscape, and all sorts of things like that. And then what we do is we kind of backtrack when you get to chapter 2, and it's almost as if Moses is take his back a little bit, and he's like zooming in like on an iPad. He's pinch and zoom onto the day in which mankind was created, and that's where we get this little section where it talks about how man came to be a living creature. And all of this is just to say is that we're being given this highlight of mankind's creation, so we can understand that mankind's creation is not accidental. He is not formed sort of willy-nilly or anything like that. This is a preordained moment in which God is breathing life, as it literally says there, into man, and he became a living creature. This, of course, conveys intentionality. It conveys purpose. It conveys this very clear wisdom and design of God in man to perform certain functions. Of course, this establishes man's place within creation. Because again, even though every other part of creation was purposely created by God, nothing's by accident. He put all those things into place, all the stars and so on and so forth. The emphasis of chapter 2 makes us notice God's thoughtfulness. Because again, there's, as I said before, we're zooming into mankind's origins. We're showing this idea that we're not just creatures that have instincts. We are living souls that have creativity, that have rationality, that have logic, that are created with this burning desire for relationship, both among other humans that are created like us, but also relationship for our Creator. I forgot this verse, but Ecclesiastes 3:11 is so powerful for understanding this, where even Solomon notices the fact that mankind has had eternity in his heart. Let me find that verse. I should have wrote it down. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11. See if I can find it here. Let me see. 3:11. Solomon says, so this is God. This is Solomon talking about the Lord. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. This idea that he has made our souls eternal, which also just means that anything that we try to fill that void of eternity is likewise going to not work. We were created for this divine relationship with our Creator, and this is utterly unique. all the other animals and all the other creatures that you can think of within the animal kingdom, they are beautiful and unique, but they're not on the same par as humans. And this is the really important part that some people want to level the playing field, and just say, yeah, human beings, they're just mammals like dolphins, and it doesn't really matter. And so that really reduces the uniqueness that God sort of poured into man when he was creating him. And again, that's what we're seeing in Genesis 2. That he's not just like every other creature. He's not just another facet of the animal kingdom that evolved the ideas for art and creativity and logic and for government and for all those types of things. That didn't just happen. That was intentionally put into man to reflect his creator. And this, again, lets us see mankind's place, because nothing else in the entire universe is instilled with the image and likeness of God. This is a status that human beings are given, that is given by God. And again, this comes out of chapter 1, verse 28 through 30. If you look at those, those are those verses that come right after the account of mankind's creation in the image of God. And it says, verse 28, and God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Here, again, this is mankind's status. This is the key word is what happens at the beginning, where he talks about reproduce after your kind, be fruitful, multiply, and have dominion over the earth. This dominion, of course, has been misconstrued in a lot of ways. This doesn't mean that we can just trash this creation just because we are biblically superior to nature or anything like that. Rather, we have, just like Adam had, the God-given responsibility to tend and care for this beautiful creation that God has given to us. Notice, I don't think I have it. I should have had it. Look at the next chapter, chapter 2, look at verse 15, where God gives Adam this responsibility. Notice his job description, if you will. The Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. So even while he was in Eden, he was specifically given a responsibility to tend and care for this beautiful creation that God has made. This, of course, I'm not trying to say that we need to all become climate activists or tree huggers or environmentalists. That's not what I'm saying. But it's also imbuing us with this, I think, amazing responsibility that we are stewards of everything that we see around us. This is part of what it means to live in the image of God. I think this is best sort of described or encapsulated by my friend Chad Bird's recent book, where he said this, that we are not biological products of evolution. We've established that fact. We are not souls trapped in a bag of flesh. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Or one more cog in the machine of a cosmos, where we are ultimately no more important than a small microorganism. Rather, humans are priestly kings and queens who simultaneously serve the Lord in this worldly temple and have dominion over all other creatures. This, I think, is really helpful for understanding what we've been talking about, our place, our status, our responsibility, what it means to live in the image of God. Just as priests function as representatives of Yahweh, this is fast forward multiple centuries, thousands of years into the history of Israel, and you have the priests of Levi, and they're functioning within the tabernacle. They're functioning within that place as the priests of the Lord. They're doing so as representatives of the Lord himself, and they are doing what? They are working and keeping, I had to find my verse, working and keep, they're tending, they're stewards of the tabernacle in service of the one who has given them that status. And you can think of the same thing, that the same sort of mandate, the same sort of prerogative was given to Adam and Eve as they were in the Garden of Eden. This was their responsibility. They were, in a way, sort of priests that were functioning within that place in order to represent their creator. So this, I think, helps us understand all of us humans are stewards and priests, representatives of the one who made us. I want to segue now into a little bit more of a technical thing, because I want to get to that, because it's going to sort of transition us into our study of the doctrine of sin, hamartiology. But before I do that, is there any questions or comments or thoughts that came to your mind as we've really unpacked and really teased out what it means to be creatures in the image of God? Any thoughts on that? Okay, save your thoughts for later. That's fine. Okay. I want to ask this question. What ingredients, and I'm using that word loosely. I didn't know what other word. What parts, ingredients, what does it mean that we are human? I think this is a really important question. And there's a lot of, this is going to be somewhat technical and maybe you'll find this boring, but I want you to see that there's some things that we have to wrestle with that maybe we don't often think about that also affects other things, that affects other doctrines in pretty significant ways. So I would say physicality and spirituality, this idea that we have bodies and we have something else that is not material, our souls or our spirits. This is what makes us human. We have a body, but we also have this part of us that's not physical, that is also there. We know that's what kind of makes us human. Again, other species are not created in the same way. They, not to burst your bubble, I don't think animals have souls that all dogs go to heaven. I don't think so. Maybe they do. Maybe there's a special dog heaven, but I don't think they have souls. Sorry, you're not going to see your precious Fido. Maybe you will. I don't know. Hopefully you will. But this again separates us from the animal kingdom. That we have both. We don't just have instincts. We don't just have this urge to migrate every fall and every spring, because that's just built into that's not something that animals developed, by the way. That's not just rational thinking, hey, I'm cold, I should migrate south because that would be a lot better for my whole family and my body. No, that was an instinct that God put into that creature. It's not like they just think about doing it. It's instinctual. That's different than rationality and the spirituality that we're talking about. And so there's kind of two views of humanity's ingredients, if you will. And this one is, this is just an interesting little argument. So there's one view which says, the dichotomous view, which says that human beings have a body and a soul. They also will interchange soul and spirit. So there's only two ingredients, if you will, body, soul. The body is the physicality part, the soul or spirit is the spirituality part. And they interchange those. And so this says that humans are two-part beings, and it hinges on this interchangeability of soul and spirit. And there is precedent for this only because when in Genesis 2:7, you'll notice that it says, the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living creature. Creature is literally the Hebrew word nephesh, or the Greek word suke, which is soul. I don't like the ESV translation here where it says living creature. It should say living soul. That's a way better translation. Because that's what he's giving mankind when he's breathing into him. He's breathing into him a living soul. And we see here that there's two parts here, if you will, of mankind's sort of origins. He's forming his body from the dust, and he's breathing into him a soul. Other places where this appears, Matthew 6:25, he talks about, do not be anxious about your life. Life is that same word there, suke, which is soul in the Greek. He talks about, I should have highlighted it. He talks about life and he talks about body. You can see that, don't be anxious about your life, nor about your body. So we mentioned body and soul here in Matthew 6:25. Matthew 10:28, Jesus again reiterates this idea, don't fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Here, dichotomy, body, soul, the physicality part and the suke, the soul part. John, writing in 3 John, he says in 3 John verse 2, he says he prays that it goes well with their health, their physical health, their bodies, but also that it goes well with their souls. So we have this dichotomy here that appears in several places. Ecclesiastes 12:7, just really quick. The dust, the physicality is going to return to the earth just as the spirit returns to the God who gave it. So that raises this interchangeability here, that body and soul or body and spirit. Same thing with 1 Corinthians 5, where Paul suggests that he's absent in physical form, if you will, because he's not physically with this church, but he prays that he can be present in spirit with them. And there's a couple of examples of interchangeability. I'm not going to run through all of these just for sake of time. One that I will draw your attention to is just for sake of just having a fun argument. This is kind of what this will be. Look at John 12. I just want to highlight this idea of, maybe you've never even thought about this, that body or that soul and spirit can be interchanged. Look at John 12, verse 27. Notice what Jesus says. He says, quote, "Now is my soul troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour, but for this purpose I have come to this hour." And then jump over, John chapter 13, look at verse 21, where he says this. And after saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his spirit. So this, right away, kind of seems to suggest that there's, you can swap both. There's different Greek words, there's different Hebrew words, but it seems as if what the New Testament is telling us is that mankind is body and soul, two parts, dichotomy. Or there's another view, trichotomy. The trichotomous view is that actually, no, those are all three separate things, body, soul, and spirit. That this is how you reflect God, is that you have three parts to you, a body, a soul, and a spirit. This would say that we're three-part beings, and that each of these are individual ingredients, if you will, if I can keep using that word. So what proponents of this view will say is that your soul regards your emotions, your intellect, your imagination, your will. It's those sorts of things. Again, things that you can't physically sort of describe or define. It's not like things that are tangible, so it's not your body. These are intangible parts of who you are. But they're there, they're present. Whereas your spirit is really this faculty that you have within you, that is given to you, that is able to relate to God. There's a couple of places where this appears. In 1 Thessalonians 5, you'll notice Paul says here, "May your whole spirit and soul and body be kept blameless." He seems to refer to this three parts of humans in this little reference here. But then also in Hebrews chapter 4, this famous verse talking about the word of the Lord being able to pierce the soul and the spirit, again, seems to convey this trichotomist view of human beings' origins. I only like to step back and say, what do you do with Mark 12, verse 30, where Jesus quotes the Shema, where he mentions heart, soul, mind, and strength. Let all of that love the Lord your God. So are we four-part beings? I always raise this to say, I'm not really sure it matters so much where you fall on whether you're a dichotomous person or a trichotomous person. Many people can even say that we're a dichotomist, but the spirit is the soul that's been sanctified by the Holy Spirit. There's lots of ways you can go about this. I think what's really important to be conveyed is that humans are not just material beings. This again is kind of important for us to grasp, but that we were made for spirituality. Precisely, we were made to communicate and commune with our Creator. That's what we were made to do. That's what we were designed to do, created for. That we have both material ingredients, we have bodies, but we also have non-material ingredients, souls and spirits, and both of these were created by God. This refutes some of the old ancient Greek views that we're humans in bodies, and these bodies are like prisons, and that we actually need to get out of these bodies because they are holding back our spirits. There's lots of different religions that will convey similar things, where we need to sort of get out of these bodies in order to become truly who we were made to be. No, that's false. Because again, who comes down and takes on a body? Jesus does. if these bodies were prisons per se, number one, I don't think Jesus would come down and take. But number two, he wouldn't still have a body in heaven. Do you realize that Jesus still has a body in heaven right now? This is rabbit trail, but I think oftentimes when we read the resurrection accounts and we know that Jesus is in his glorified body, I think we have in our mind's eye like he's like some like ghost or spirit like from Scooby-Doo, and he's just really ethereal or something. No, he had a physical body. He's eating, he's drinking, he's being touched by his disciples, and even still that same body is the one that's in heaven. And this is so important doctrinally. We can get into that doctrine maybe later, but maybe, yeah, anyways. It's really important doctrinally that he is, this is why it talks about in Colossians that he is the first fruits of the resurrection. He's talking about the resurrection of the body, and his is the first fruits of that, and that's why where he remains in glory. Anyways, that's a sidebar. Any religion or spiritual notion that's going to tell you that these bodies are things that we need to escape, no. God created us specifically for that. And more than that, when we get our glorified bodies, we're not going to become angels or spirits. We're still going to have bodies with flesh and blood. It's going to be perfect flesh and blood, not flesh and blood that's tainted by sin, but we're still going to have bodies. We're not going to be like floating angels. We don't become angels when we die, nor do we become angels in like the millennial reign or whatever you believe on regarding eschatology. I'll let Eric work all that out later. But we're not given that. We actually have bodies, physical bodies. By the way, I'm not going to steal Eric's thunder. We're probably going to be spending more time on the new earth than we are in the new heaven. But anyways, that's another discussion. Anyways, I say all that to say that where then do our souls come from? So we know where our bodies come from. God forms us from the dust of... I'm going to try and run through this. This is going to be a lot. Our bodies come from God forming us out of the dust of the ground, and we know that he breathes into us. So there's a couple of theories here of where our souls come from. And this is going to be important, just so you know. This is not just theological garbage. This is, I think, going to help us wrestle with the doctrine of sin coming up. So the first idea is the pre-existent theory, that our souls have always existed. This is Hinduism. This is reincarnation. You can pretty much throw this out. New Age people will try to convince you of this or whatever. There's some New Age theories that aren't just like blatant Hinduism and all those kinds of things that will try to convince you of this theory, but it has no basis within Scripture at all. The other theory is the creation theory, that our souls are created by God. This theory would then posit that human DNA is only responsible for our bodies. So when reproduction happens, that's only material. That's only this part of us. It's not the immaterial. It's not the spirituality that we have within us. So we can say the God consciousness is what proponents of this creation theory would say is a work of God at conception. I think this is probably the most famous verse that would sort of prove that or go along with that, where the psalmist says, "For you formed my inward parts, you have knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." Okay, so that I'm running through this, but I want you to wrestle with this question before we leave. There's this other theory, Traducian theory, which also says that our soul is passed on by our parents. So they would say those who hold to this view say that human DNA contains all of the ingredients for both bodies and souls. And this is kind of what conception is all about, because humans reproduce after their kind. Notice Genesis 5:3. When Adam lived 130 years, notice this phrase, he fathered a son in his own likeness. And again, after the fall, after all of that nonsense. I don't want to say this, is that those two theories, creation theory, Traducian theory, have been debated for centuries. Long time. We're not going to settle it here. I'm not trying to tell you that I've figured it out. No, they've been debated for a long time. And the reasons why, because both have a lot of strengths and weaknesses. The creationist theory basically is saying God is still creating because he's creating souls. So how do you jive that with Genesis 2:2 where it says that he stopped from his creating and he rested? If he's still in the business of creating souls, does that contradict what the Bible says here and in Exodus and in Hebrews where it says that he stopped from his creative work? Something to think about. Or the Traducian theory says that human reproduction includes body and soul. So when that zygote is formed in a mother's womb, that has all of the ingredients, both material and non-material. So what do you do about the incarnation? Does Jesus have a nature to sin? He just didn't? That is why I want to bring this up, because this is relevant here. Where does humanity's sinful nature come from? Is it something that we are born with, or is it something that we fall into? And I'm going to leave you on that question. That's probably going to be annoying, but I want to leave you there because I want you to wrestle with that. Because this is going to be super formative for how we understand sin and its remedy. Because many proponents of modern theology or modern bibliology or what have you will try to convince you that mankind isn't born naturally a sinner. And this is that idea that, babies, when they come into the world, they aren't born in original sin. Some people will try to convince you of that. And what does original sin mean? Well, how I would take it is that, and I'm jumping ahead, but original sin, that means that from conception we are sinners. There's not a time when we're not sinners. We're not born with a nature that's genuinely good and we fall into sin and we become sinners. No, we are born sinners. Now, I'm not going to try and we're not going to try and get into all of the biology of that. Well, the sin nature is carried forward through the sperm or something. No, we're not going to try and get all that. But I want you to understand and wrestle with this question, especially it relates to our souls and where does our sin nature come from? Because this is going to get into hamartiology, the doctrine of sin, but I think this is also super formative for how we understand salvation too. The doctrine of how this sin is remedied. Okay, I'm going to leave you on that cliffhanger. Who has any questions or who is just entirely confused? I was really confused, honestly. Wrestling with a lot of these questions, it's hard to keep knowing where this is going. The only reason why we bring up this wrestling of the souls is because of this right here. So, yes, Ashley.
There are two things. One is, does it actually say in the Greek or the Hebrew, whatever Genesis was originally inspired in, that he is finished creating, or that he was just finished with what he created? Because
Good
those
question.
are two very different things. And the other one is, and I don't know enough, so please, it's not like I'm really smart, I'm just saying this, but I've seen unexplained videos in science and labs and the dishes that, we're scientifically making babies now, but there is a flash of light that they've been capturing in the creation of, I don't know, did you call it a zygote? but yeah, when these two parts of man and woman come together, it's the only thing they can explain.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to think that has something to do with their souls.
Yeah.
Personally. But again, I don't even know enough to know what it's called. I just know I've seen it and they can't explain it.
So, to answer your first question, Genesis 2:2 says, literally, and on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done.
Right.
I can look in the Hebrew and look at the past tense, or look at the tense and see what that exactly is referring to. I don't have that in front of me, but I will. And
in my English, it looks like it's just what he did, not what he's going to keep doing. It's just he was done for now.
Yeah, that's one way that I think many of those who believe in the creation, and I'm not saying I am partial to one or the other, but I think we should think about these things only in terms of relating to human nature and original sin. And I do think that's a really valid argument to make, that he was done with his creation but not ever done creating. That very reasonable to argue that.
Because if he was done with creating, you would be taking a very fundamental part of who God is away. So,
True. Yeah.
like, that can't be.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to jump in on the, are we body and soul or body, soul, and spirit? And I think we're three, body, soul, and spirit from the language, only because that matches patterns of God. He's a triune God, we'd be a triune human. And I think, and it, it's not, like you said, a huge deal either way. But I think when it breaks it down into body and soul, or body and spirit and two things, I think sometimes it can get lumped in, how you said soul and spirit can be interchanged, because they're the only two parts of us that are not physical, and then kind of get changed out. And I think sometimes it can be similar to how we say angels and demons, even though when people mean angels and bad angels, is what they really mean, but they're calling it a different name, demons. I think we can run into that same trick here, where sometimes when it says soul or spirit, it's encompassing the unseen part. And then that's why when you get to Hebrews 4, you're dividing between soul and spirit, which means they must be fused somewhere. That's my take on it, but again, not going to keep you out of heaven.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so. But this is just stuff to wrestle with, especially as we wrestle with the knowledge of God. That's what all of these doctrines are doing. They're inviting us into furthering and deepening our knowledge of God. And this is one that I think is going to be really important. The doctrine of sin, super important. Wrestle with this. Come back next week. I really want to unpack that. And I'm not going to say we're going to figure out creationism versus traditionalism, but we'll unpack that a little bit. And then also get into the doctrine of sin, because I think that's going to be really, really key. Because, of course, we cannot fathom humanity apart from sin. So our conception of sin is going to be really important, because we've been living in sin since Adam and Eve, 4,000 years ago, depending on your timeline. So it's really important for us to consider that and understand that, and then that'll help us understand the Savior. Eric, you have
just one more thing. We're not going to even go into it, because this question that he's leaving with you guys, do a lot of research on, are we born with it or do we fall into it? Because when you talked about people, where do babies go in baby baptism, this is like one of the big triggers for that. So yeah, it gets really interesting in this.
It does. All right. All right, so we are in, again, this is Ologies. We are covering man, sin, and salvation. This is part number 4. Hopefully, we will be wrapping up this little subsection in the next couple of weeks. Then we're going to move into the doctrine of the church, which is ecclesiology. And then the last one is the doctrine of end times, which is eschatology. So we're nearing the end of this broad study on systematic theology. And hopefully what it's inspiring you to do is to actually do your own studies. Some of these topics, as we've discussed even here, they don't always have definitive answers, and that's partly okay. There's some of the things that we've talked about even in this little sub-series. We've realized that there's not a definitive answer one way or another, and ultimately that's okay. We can all do our own deep dive into the Word, and I think that's really what if anyone takes off and does that, that would be the best sort of result, is going and doing your own sort of study. So last time I sort of left you on somewhat of a doctrinal cliffhanger, if you will, speaking of things that don't always have definitive answers. I wanted you to think about the question, where does your sin nature come from? This is stemming from our previous discussion in the last session, which was on the quote-unquote ingredients that make us human, our bodies, our souls, our spirits. We decided that ultimately it doesn't matter whether you think those are 3 things or whether you think those are 2 things. The important part is that what makes us human isn't just our flesh and blood, but also our spirits/souls. And we were also considering the idea that the origin of our souls is not as clear as perhaps we would think, and that this is also influencing our sin nature. So all of this is kind of wrapped up into one big sort of ball of a conversation. So anyone want to start us off this morning? Anyone have any thoughts? Did you do the homework? Did you consider where our sin nature comes from? Yes, Summer raised her hand really fast.
Well, I found this verse, and I wanted to just see what everybody else thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
It was Psalms 51:5. It says, "Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me."
Mhm.
And in like other versions, it basically said like I was conceived in sin and like stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a great verse, Psalm 51:5. This is, of course, David praying after his sin with Bathsheba and Uriah, and this is his prayer of repentance. And he's acknowledging the fact that, at least from this verse, what it sounds like is from conception, he was a sinner. And he's recognizing that, he's acknowledging that fact, that there wasn't a time where he became a sinner. Actually, he was a sinner from conception. That's a great verse for understanding that part, especially where our sin nature comes from. This is a great verse in terms of making that particular argument. Anyone else have any thoughts on that, or perhaps some of the things that you came to on your own conclusions? Eric's waiting. Okay, Matt's gonna go.
My simplest way to, maybe in my mind, to explain it is, we're not God, obviously, and he created us. So since he created us, we're not him. We're not holy like he is holy. So therefore, just in that fact alone, we're, I don't want to say we're doomed, but we have that nature that it could creep in, and and then obviously with the verse that was just shared, I would probably say that's a good point to start.
Definitely. Eric, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to pretty much agree with the consensus that we are sinful upon birth. And the reason, along with Summer's verse is fantastic for that one that she found, but the whole reason there needs to be a virgin birth, I think that's the reason there's an emphasis on the virgin birth, because we inherit our sin. Like from a scientific standpoint, you'd say our DNA is corrupted. And so we only get corrupt DNA, which is why Christ had to be born from God. Had he been born from man, he'd have some corruptness in him. And he wouldn't have, I think that's why the virgin birth is so important.
Yeah, definitely. I'm probably going to play my cards, but the question is, where does your sin nature come from? Are you born with it, or do you fall into it? And that's sort of related to the idea, where do your souls come from? And where does our sin nature? All of that, I think, is wrapped up into one. And if I were to play my cards, I would just say this. Toddlers don't have to be taught to think selfishly or sinfully. And if you've ever been around kids, you know this to be true. There's not a time where you have to, hey, think for yourself and grab that toy away from the other toddler because you want it. No, that comes from within. A verse that I don't have in my notes that probably would be helpful is to think of Mark chapter 7, where Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, and they're talking about hand washing. Remember, hey, why don't your disciples follow the hand washing rituals that we do? And we're doing all this kind of crazy hand washing stuff because we're making ourselves pure. And then Jesus says, don't you know that all impurities come from out of man's heart? It's not as if we receive sinfulness from our environment. No, sin comes from within. We are sinners to the core of who we are, and that means we need something different than just outward cleanliness in order to make us clean. So there's a lot of text, sorry for that, but my sort of questioning on all of these things, there's going to be lots of questions I want you to think of. If toddlers have a nature that wants to sin, and I think that's verifiably true, and I haven't done a lot of case studies, but I can just say that anecdotally. Where does that sinful nature come from? And then also, this gets to our question of the origin of the souls. If God is the one creating souls, can he create sinful souls? Can he create souls that have a propensity to sin? Or is there a moment where if we are receiving our souls from God, like remember we identified there's two trains of thought. Our souls are either created by God, just like creation, ex nihilo, out of nothing, upon the moment of conception, or all of the ingredients for what makes us human, body and soul, are transferred within human DNA, we could say. Is there somewhere along the line where we become sinners? These are the questions that I think we can wrestle through, that I don't think we can pass over, and the reason why is because our hamartiology, which, by the way, is the word for the doctrine of sin, that's just the fancy word if you want to be fancy, if you want to talk about the doctrine of sin, hamartiology, we're going to get to that, it's the Greek word hamartia, will have a direct impact on your soteriology, the way you think about salvation. And this is going to be, I think, super, super important for us to consider. Because both of these, as we've said before, they relate to one another. And if you have one sort of view of sin, it will change the way you view the gospel, change the way you view what it means to be saved. I'm going to refer you once again to the State of Theology survey. I've referred this to you a lot, but I like to because, again, it gives you a pulse of what people are thinking. And what you know, it has a statement or something to respond to relating to our very topic. And one of them is, this is statement number 15, states, everyone is born innocent in the eyes of God. Let me just take a survey here. How many of you would agree with this statement? Good, unanimous. We are not born innocent. Now again, I'm playing my cards. We are not born innocent in the eyes of God. But what should concern us is the fact that 61% of evangelicals that we would largely agree with, that's what evangelicals is. It's like moderately agreement with us Baptists. 61% agreed with that statement that we are born into this world innocent. Now this is very, I think, important for us to consider. Number one, how they're getting there, but then also why they're trying to make this statement. Because my question is when does the shift happen? If we're born innocent, when's the moment when we become sinners? Because what they're essentially saying is that we are born guiltless, and that there's somewhere along the line, who knows wherever that's going to happen, somewhere along the line in a person's development, in a person's growth, as they're aging, as whatever, as they're developing, they become sinners. And I think that this is kind of a big problem. It's a big problem to say that because if we become sinners sometime after we are born or even after conception, this is going to change the remedy that the gospel is meant to offer. And again, that's why all of these things are important for us to keep in mind. So this morning we're going to dive into the doctrine of sin. We're going to dive into it, and we're going to... it's not that I'm not going to answer the whole souls question, but I think we're going to be led to the same conclusion as we go forward. So, two big questions when it comes to the doctrine of sin. Number one, where does sin come from? And number two, how is sin passed down? These are, I think, the two most essential questions when we're talking about sin, when we're talking about our sinful natures as human beings. These two are, I think, the most important questions to consider that also, by the way, relate to our souls question. So, we're going to answer the first one this morning, the origins of sin. Of course, we have to go to Genesis chapter 3. So, go to that really famous chapter, Genesis 3. And some people, by the way, will, and we can hash this out if you want to, but some people, by the way, will try to like trip Christians up by saying, this is not the origin of sin because clearly there was Satan, clearly there was a serpent. I would like to just differentiate, or maybe we can take this survey, and maybe the way I'm thinking is just wrong, but the way I think about it, or I'll just pose this question to you. Can angels sin? What? I think you can technically define it as sin, but I'll just think about it like this. I think Satan rebelled, and now he's evil, but sin is a human transaction against God, which means this is sin's entrance upon creation. That doesn't mean that evil hasn't existed before this moment. Clearly, it has in eternity past. Satan and his angels, as Eric talked about, a third of them, who knows what the number was, they fell in a very, very inglorious rebellion. So there's evil and there's rebellion, but sin is a human transgression of a law of God. At least that's how we're going to at least explore it. So if someone tries to trip you up on like, this is not the origin of sin, there's always been... Tell them that there was an angelic rebellion. This is talking about a very big difference between an angelic rebellion and a human transgression of a law of God. Anyways, that's just tangential. So we're getting into the origins of sin upon creation. Genesis chapter number 3. Easily one of the most famous chapters. Adam and Eve, as you know, probably perhaps from your earliest days of Sunday school, they eat the apple. Maybe it was an apple. I had a teacher one time try to tell me for certain that it was a banana. And that was the fruit of heaven or whatever. I'm not even sure why he said that, but he swore it wasn't an apple. But anyways, we're not going to really concern ourselves about that. The essential thing to know about this chapter is the fact that this comes at the end of God's creative work. So God, in chapter number 2 of Genesis, it says that he finished his work of creation and he rested the very first, you could call it Sabbath day, which becomes the rhythm of God's people as he goes along. Life in Eden was flawless. This is a really important point to make. That within this very historical moment of time, it's not mythical, that's another sort of tangent. People are going to try to convince you that the first 3 chapters of Genesis mainly are just poetry, they're an analogy, they're some sort of like biblical fiction, because then they can make all kinds of different arguments from there. It's important to note this is very much history, and this particular moment in history was flawless. Everything was perfect. As God said, if you go back to Genesis 1, the last verse, as he says, everything was very good. Everything was perfect. He had set everything into place. Everything that he had spoken into existence had a particular order, had a particular design. Everything was flawless. A good word to think of is the Hebrew word shalom. Everything was at peace. That's what that word means. Everything at this particular juncture was at rest, just like God was resting. Everything was at rest. Everything was as it should be. And the thing to consider is that this shalom is more than just like a peace of mind and that everything is calm and cool and collected. Actually, no. What this means is completeness, fulfillment, and harmony. All of those things to the ultimate degree. There was ultimate completeness with Adam and Eve in the garden as they were. This perfect man and perfect woman were there, and they were communing with each other, communing with God. They were communing with nature. They were doing their jobs within whatever role that God had given them. They were in perfect harmony. It was ultimate fulfillment. They were fulfilled. There was nothing. The other way I like to consider this shalom is that nothing was lacking. Everything was as it should be. And I think a great way to think about this is if we kind of use Genesis 3:8 in reverse, because this is a verse, as you might know, will come after they've sinned and they're kind of hiding in shame. But so let's read this together, Genesis 3:8, and then we'll kind of reverse it, which is, and it says, "They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord among the trees of the garden." Of course, this comes in a moment in which they're fearful of God coming down and communing with them. But let's reverse that. Prior to the fall, we can somewhat infer this was a normal occurrence. It's almost as if God has like a regular calendar appointment. Oh, it's time for my afternoon walk. And he comes down, communes with Adam and Eve, and they walk around the garden a couple times, and they're talking or whatever. Who knows what they were talking about? Who knows what was happening during those wonderful afternoon conversations? And this is what we're kind of getting at, is that they were in perfect harmony with each other, with their Maker. They had want of nothing. They were filled with all of the fullness that their Creator had given them. They had a purpose and a command to follow. Look at Genesis 2, verse 15. "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, 'You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of the good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die.'" That's important for later. But the point is, everything was in order. They had been given this mandate, as we heard earlier in chapter 1, of being in a place of dominion over creation, of serving creation, of being sort of like priests and stewards of creation. Even as they did all of that, this is what brought glory to their Creator. And I think the other important point to make is that, especially in these verses, when God tells them not to eat of this tree, it's not a restriction. And it sounds like it is. That's how we hear it through our human ears. But essentially what's happening is he's telling them, hey, this is how goodness works. I've called everything very good. I've put you exactly where you need to be. You have want of nothing. And if this is my standard for what is good. My standard for what is good means following my word, and it's not a restriction. It's not meant to put you down. Actually, this is meant for your flourishing, for your joy. This is for your fulfillment. This is why I've put that in place. This is kind of how God envisioned creation to function, you can say. Here's this. It's off limits. You don't need to worry about that. You have 99% of all the other things at your disposal. Except for this one, but don't worry about that because I'm telling you everything else is yours. Everything else is yours to manage, to steward, to enjoy. And this, again, is God's standard for goodness. It looks like following him. This, again, gets to what we talked about last time, that God created us to follow, to worship, to ascribe worth to him, that he's made us for his glory. Ecclesiastes 3:11, he's created us with eternity in our souls. This is, again, how he designed it all to work. And I also think that this tree, and there's lots of commentary on this particular tree for whatever reason, is actually, we could call it a litmus test for trust. And that's sort of what's happening. Hey, do you trust that my standard for goodness, you could call it, is actually for your good? And we're going to see that mankind was deceived into thinking that, no, that wasn't actually true. So, Genesis 3:1. This is where our story begins. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? So first, we actually see a serpent, or quote, the serpent is approaching Eve, and he's approaching her, as it says, in a crafty, a cunning, a deceitful manner. His whole motivation, of course, is treacherous from the start. He's not to be trusted. We always know that this is Satan, or at least that's always how we picture it. And just so, if you want proof that this serpent is Satan, it's not just in your imagination. Revelation 12, verse 9, where it says, and the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. This is within John's apocalypse, within his Revelation, and I'm sure Eric will get to a lot of this, but it's also helpful to use this as sort of a backwards applicator, if you will, to sort of apply to the serpent here. That ancient serpent is, of course, the one that we're talking about here. So we can know that whatever this serpent looked like, and there's all kinds of ways that he is pictured within art, within Christian history and tradition, whether he was a serpent that had legs or whether he was just some kind of dragon. Who knows what he looked like? It doesn't really matter. He took the form of a serpent, and he approaches Eve with a dilemma. And notice again his dilemma. He said to the woman, verse 1, did God actually say? Those are the most important words. You shall not eat of any tree in the garden. So he approaches her with this question, a question of what God had said. And according to Satan, we're going to see what he's actually trying to get Eve to believe. According to him, God gave his creatures everything, or we could say, according to what we've read so far, God gave his creatures everything they could want or need. He has put them in this garden. He's put everything at their disposal, as we've seen. He's made everything very good. But then Satan is now sort of throwing some shade on that, and he's prompting Eve to sort of question in her own mind, what did God actually say? And notice again, verse number 2, and the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither touch it, lest you die. Now she's adding to what God's word said. God never said that you're going to die if you touch it. He said you'll die if you eat it. You'll die if you partake of it. That was his command if you look at verse 16 and 17. Eve's already stumbling. It's like if you're not good at thinking on your feet and someone approaches you with a question and you're like, well, it's hard sometimes to get the right things out and maybe you'll slip up and say something wrong. That's clearly what's happened here. She's a little flustered. She's approached by this serpent, and whether she's surprised by this snake that's talking or not, I don't know, but regardless, she's a little flustered, she's a little off her game, and she starts adding to what God actually said. She's applying more restrictions to what God had actually told them. And now, after that, notice what Satan does next. Notice what the serpent does next. But the serpent said to the woman, so he's going to press this matter. He's exploiting Eve's sort of doubt or even confusion. And the serpent says to the woman, you shall not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So this is his scenario. According to Satan, the Creator is a miser. The Creator, he actually is not, he doesn't really have your best interest at heart. He's actually not watching out for your good. He actually hasn't applied everything according to his standard of goodness for your flourishing, for his glory, and for yours. That's actually not true, he says. What Satan is trying to convince them of is that God was actually holding something back. He knows God's been lying to you, Eve. God's been trying to get you to not concern yourself with that tree over there, because he knows that what happens is that you can actually be the God of your own existence. You can make your own shalom. That was Satan's lie. Satan's lie was that the shalom of Eden was a lie, but that they could be like God and make their own shalom. This peace, this harmony, this fulfillment that you have all around you, it's a lie. It's not actually real. It's just been sort of God's way of keeping you in line, keeping you in check, making sure that you don't question his standard, that you don't try to sort of resist what God has laid down for you and for the creation of the world. And of course, we know that this lie that Satan is telling is very alluring, because suddenly now there's this doubt that's creeping into Eve's mind, and her focus is being drawn away from all, again, of the blessings that were at her disposal, instead of to the one thing that we could say was being used as a symbol of God's cruelty. Look at what he's holding back from you. Look at what he is not allowing you to enjoy. He's actually just He's a tyrannical despot. God is not a God who loves you. He's not a creator who delights in giving to his image bearers all that he is. No, actually, he's a dictator. And he's keeping something from you that you would enjoy. And of course, we know that this is way too tempting for Eve and for Adam to resist. Verse 6. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate. So immediately they make this decision. They're tempted by the idea that they can make their own shalom, that they can make their own peace and fulfillment and harmony and completeness. And then it says, verse 7, then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together, and they made themselves loincloths. The effects of sin and rebellion are felt right away. It doesn't take long. They eat, and before it's even is going down their esophagus, whatever fruit it was, they are feeling exactly what they did. Immediately, they start scrambling. They realize their nakedness. And suddenly, shame sets in. Suddenly, guilt sets in. Suddenly, they are overcome with this urgency to cover themselves up and to hide. In the verse that we read, verse number 8, where they hear God is coming. Hey, where are you? Hey, it's time for our afternoon walk. Where are you? And they're hiding. Shame, regret, guilt. All of that sets in at that moment. And clearly, Satan had lied. I mean, clearly he did. As it says in John chapter 8, when Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, he calls Satan the father of lies. So this is no surprise for us. But again, I want you to see that this tree that we've talked about is not really the point of it. The point of the tree is to know how it's the standard of God's goodness and how God is saying, this is how life works best, when this is in place and you follow my words. Satan's dilemma, his deception, was to question the standard that the Creator had laid down. And again, did you catch that phrase in verse number 1 of Genesis where it talks about how the serpent himself was one who was made? So even he had rebelled against God's design, against God's standard for all of the created order, how he wanted all of that to work. Even he was in rebellion of that, and he's tempting others to rebel right along with him. This tree was a test which mankind promptly failed. We could go to that verse in 1 John chapter 2 where it talks about the lust of the eyes and the lust of the flesh and the pride of life, and how all of that is a great sort of grid to look at Eve's temptation. All of it is right there. And it's meant to prove mankind's trust in their Creator and his word, which they failed. So here we have to understand this. The fall, what we've briefly, quickly ran through, is a result of mankind's distrust. The first temptation of Satan was to distrust what God had said. Now, you can't actually believe your Creator because he doesn't really have your best interest in mind, and this is what led to disobedience and death. That distrust, doubt of what God had actually said, led to a disobedience, then led to death, as it talks about how death came into all of creation at this moment. And this, of course, gets to the verse that we're going to spend a lot of time sort of going over next week, which is Romans chapter 5, verse 12, which says this: Therefore, just as sin came into the world, what we just covered, through one man, and death through sin, so death spread to all because all sinned. This is what we just talked about. Adam is the head of creation. The blame falls on him. So that's why Paul is talking about him in this way, that death and sin came into the world through him. Sin came into the world in this way through distrust, and which led to disobedience, which led to death. Adam and Eve chose in that moment to determine what was good. God had called everything very good, but they chose that they could be the ones that could determine what was good for themselves. They were fooled into thinking that they could make shalom on their own. And then when they did that, they brought creation down with them. And this is what I want you to see here. That the scope of sin is bigger than you think. Again, look at Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That's where we get that word sinned is hamartia, or the Greek word chata, which is the word that you'll see most often used for sin. And it means just kind of simply missing the mark. Think of archery. You're shooting an arrow at a target and it falls short. That's exactly what Paul is talking about. That in man's stupid decision making, his foolish trust of the serpent, he has been led into believe that he can make for his own glory. And yet, no matter how hard he tries, he's always going to fall short. He's always going to miss the mark. Why? Because he was created for a purpose that God has given him. So, this is sin in a nutshell. Sin is a violation of God's standard by replacing it with your own. You're saying, I don't need to operate by God's standard. I can make up my own standard. So even in this, I think, should help us that when we get into even little sins, little moments in which we are tempted to not follow what God has given us, what God has sort of told us in His Word, or what the Spirit is influencing us to pursue, even all of those little moments are little repetitions of the garden in which we are being deceived that this, whatever this is an object, a person, an image that you want to lust after, a pursuit that you want to pursue, whatever this is that Satan is giving you to say, this is what's going to fulfill you. You can make your own peace. You don't have to stay within the See, look at God's so restricting. Look at how confining he is. It's a lie. Sin is a lie. It's all a big lie to say that you can get that and you can make your own fulfillment. That's what sin is. It's a violation of God's standard with the temptation and the belief on your part that, yeah, that's true. I don't have to follow God's standard. I can make my own. From stealing the smallest pack of gum to cheating on your spouse. The whole spectrum is covered by that. And maybe you're thinking, well, this is way too heavy for Sunday school. I'm sorry, but this is the doctrine of sin. We're trying to wrap our minds around this, because then this helps us understand the doctrine of salvation. But really quickly, I wanted to leave you with this, that the scope of sin is a lot bigger than you think. Sin fractures what God called good, which is the whole creation. And I've called it a rebellious reversal of creation. And if you look at Jeremiah 4, look at this phrase that stands out. Jeremiah is talking about the foolishness of the people of God. They're doing evil. And notice, I looked on the earth and behold, it was without form and void. Woo, alarm bells. Where did that come from? Genesis 1. When before creation, everything was without form and it was void. And then God brought that chaos into order through creation. And basically the prophet Jeremiah is basically saying this, that sin undoes what God has done in creation. It's an undoing of it. No wonder why Paul says in Romans chapter 8 that all of creation is groaning. He says that. So it's not just human beings that are affected by the fall. It fractures everything. It fractures what God called good. And this gets to the heart of what we're going to talk about as we continue talking about the doctrine of sin, but it gets to the heart of what God in Christ came to remedy. This is what he's come to remedy. This is the scope of sin also lets us know the scope of salvation. This lets us understand that as people who understand who we are human beings. We talked about anthropology. We are made up of body and soul. And also our body and soul is affected by sin. We need someone who can put all of that back together, who can put us back into shalom, who can rewrite all of the wrongs that we've inflicted. That's what all of this is setting up for. This doctrine of sin is heavy, but it leads us, I think, to consider and to cherish a doctrine of salvation in a much more true way. With that, I'm going to leave you there. Any questions or comments or thoughts that came to your mind as we were talking? Yes, Mr. Bill.
I read something that never occurred to me. It says, the serpent talked to the woman.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why did he talk to her? Was Adam there? And later on he says that the two were together.
Yeah. So this is...
Did he come in after and she already was eating the apple and gave her a piece? Or what? Why did he address her and not both of them?
So this is the big question, right? What was Adam doing while Eve was eating? I think there's a lot of credence to the fact that they were together, maybe not right on top of each other, and that's why the serpent was speaking to Eve, because he knew that he could deceive her better, perhaps. But also the failure of the man is, we could say, a failure of male headship, of male leadership, and he's not doing anything in this moment to resist that. There's a lot of ways you can go. There's a lot of imaginary things. The important thing to know is that there's, as we'll talk about this later, I think it's in Romans where it talks about how, or maybe it's in 1 Timothy. Regardless, in one of Paul's letters, it talks about how the woman was deceived, but the man basically chose. He wasn't deceived. He was convinced, you could say, into choosing that. So there's a little bit of, we could say, a line there, but we're not really told where Adam was. Of course, in verse 6, it kind of appears that he was kind of in the vicinity. So a lot of that is just conjecture. There's a lot of traditions that are surrounding that, but I think it's clearly a failure on both of their parts, and it's interesting, as we noticed in Romans 5, Paul is ascribing it all all to Adam, which I think is a really notable thing to point out. Any other comments or thoughts that came to your mind? Yeah, Beard.
So C.S. Lewis in his book Paralandra, which is actually rewriting of Paradise Lost, which is an expounding upon this passage. During the temptation, where it's actually a guy named Weston and a green lady, during that temptation, the forbidden fruit is actually fixed land because they all float around on floating islands in the sea, and he's trying to convince her to dwell in a fixed land because that is the forbidden fruit. But Ransom, the third party to that temptation, which is a changing from Earth to Venus, the story grows how C.S. Lewis wrote it. There's aspects of obedience that Ransom presents. It's like obeying God and tending to the land and everything that we're doing is a form of obedience, but it is self-serving, whereas there's no like we're just benefiting ourselves. If God hadn't told us to do this, we'd be doing it anyway. Whereas with the fixed land, it's something that we can step out of our will and into His will in following that obedience as a way of actually serving Him as opposed to just being self-serving.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of use that as like a paradigm to consider the tree and this quote-unquote forbidden fruit. And again, the obedience that's there that God has laid down is not like a cage. It's not a constricting sort of thing. It was meant for their flourishing. And the deception is to say that there's something better out there that is better for you to enjoy and is being prevented. That's always like the off-limits thing. It's always that idea that it's like that grass is greener syndrome. It's way better over there, and then you get over there and it's not as good. It's worse. And that's a sort of rudimentary way, but it's kind of a simple way to understand the temptation of the serpent. Any other comments or thoughts? Yes.
Does Satan take many forms?
I would say yes. He appears, well, even just in the verse that we covered in Revelation, it talks about him as a great dragon, a serpent. He's called the angel of light in the books of Corinthians. I would definitely ascribe to what Eric has talked about in terms of he can shapeshift, in terms of he can manifest in different forms. It's also hard to know what is symbolic. Like that Revelation verse is important because we would say that he's taking a form of a serpent. Can he take the form of a dragon? I don't know. Is it being symbolic, or is it being metaphorical, or is it being literal? That's kind of hard to know when you're getting into the books of Revelation. But I would definitely say that he is one who can take different forms. Eric's. Okay.
Yeah, I'm actually going to jump in a separate thing. I agree with everything you said there. Just that this is really interesting and sort of related but unrelated. But 1 Timothy 2, it's a controversial verse to especially Wesleyans and people like that. But it says, I do not permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man, rather she is to remain quiet. And then if you follow up the verse, it actually links it to this. For Adam was formed first, then even Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. So what's really interesting is how Paul ties this whole situation in the beginning to his explanation of 1 Timothy 2, which is really interesting. It's an interesting connection because he doesn't just say, hey, I don't permit a woman to teach and drop it there. He ties it to this deception somehow. It's really interesting.
Any thoughts or comments? Anything else about this morning? All right, we're going to get into a little bit of the end of the doctrine of sin and then also the doctrine of salvation next time, so make sure you're ready for that. I'm looking forward to wrapping up this little subsection, and then we'll get into the doctrine of the church very soon. Okay, this morning we are engaging in part number 5 of this subsection of our Ologies series. Lord willing, next Sunday will be part number 6, so the last of my little subsection of our Ologies series, after which we will turn it over to Mr. Matt Shively, who is going to be taking us through ecclesiology, and then however long that takes, and then we have eschatology. So we're nearing the end of this systematic theology series, and hopefully you've gleaned much from it. Hopefully you've been able to find a lot that perhaps maybe you haven't thought a lot before, but maybe even more so, maybe things that you have thought about before, but they're kind of coalescing, they're kind of coming together for you in a way as you read the scriptures and putting all of the different doctrinal pieces together. Again, all of this is stirring us, hopefully it's stirring you to be good students of the Word. This is really just a launching off point. Each of these series that we've gone through, the sub-series of the different doctrines, you could spend a lot more time. We're only spending 6 weeks on roughly these 3 topics, anthropology, hamartiology, and soteriology. And I'm already preparing you. I will probably do a disservice to the doctrine of salvation because we could spend a long time talking about everything that's involved in that. So all of this is just to say these are like bird's eye flyovers. And what you have in front of you, the Word of God, is where you can really nail down, dig down, and get really a lot deeper. So hopefully this is stirring you to do that. That's really kind of my goal. Regardless, last week we ended on a fairly sour note. We've been talking about hamartiology, the doctrine of sin, where it comes from, and all those sorts of things. And we spent a lot of time last week engaging with Genesis chapter 3. And we left off with Adam and Eve as they plunged the world into sin, as they, the very familiar story. They believed in the lie of the serpent. They ate of the fruit that they were not supposed to eat of, and they believed that they could be their own God. We were examining Genesis 3 from this perspective of how sin came into the world. And basically how sin came into the world, it infiltrated through the deception of Satan, in which now mankind, Adam and Eve, were questioning that this world that God had given them, that God had called very good, wasn't in fact very good. And in fact, they could make their own goodness, and that's what we've spent a lot of time talking about. We saw that there were a lot of terms for sin. We flew over a couple of these, but some terms for sin that appear in Scripture are terms like transgression, or rebellion, or lawlessness, or ungodliness, or iniquity. The most common, of course, comes from the book of Romans, where Paul says, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." This word sinned is where we get the word hamartiologies, hamartia in Greek, or chata in Hebrew, and this appears over and over and over again throughout both Testaments, Old and New. Does anyone remember the sort of short definition of what this word means? No, everyone fails the pop quiz. No. If you remember archery, you would know that it means missing the mark. Essentially, that's what this word means. You're missing the mark of what God has laid down, His standard, and you're missing it through choices, through actions. And so we spent a lot of time exploring that. We also just made this sort of summary statement because if you're missing the mark, you're failing to live within the standard of goodness that God has laid down, that God has ordained. We can think about it this way. Sin is blatant distrust of God, which leads to obedience. And this is sort of the whole way we can understand Genesis 3. The serpent got Eve to distrust what God had said was very good, so it's distrust that leads to disobedience that then, of course, leads to death. This is very clear, Genesis 3:6. "So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate." And this is, again, that moment where sin infiltrated the world. And again, we mentioned this last time, but just to reemphasize too, this is Genesis 3:6. You could kind of draw a parallel to 1 John 2:16, which is where the Apostle John says, "For all that is in the world, the desire of the flesh and the desire of the eyes and the pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world." All of that is a really good way of understanding sin and understanding that initial moment when sin infiltrated the world through Eve's deception, through believing in the lie. But again, as we saw last time, they chose. They chose to distrust, and then that led to disobedience. They chose to trust actually more in the serpent's words more than in their creator's. And again, the gist of Satan's lie was that the creator, God the creator, didn't really have their best interest at heart. He actually wasn't good. He was more like a tyrant. He was more like a miser. And he was keeping something. The tree was representative of something that he was holding back from them. He was keeping something from them that they should enjoy. And they failed the test, so to speak, because they believed in the lie that they could make their own shalom. They could make their own peace. They could make their own fulfillment. That they could complete themselves, because actually they're not complete right now. Actually, there's something missing. And that the Creator is holding something back from them. And instead of finding their glory in what God has given them, the gifts that God had given them for free, and finding their happiness there and finding their fulfillment in God himself, sin, we could really understand it as the rebellious choice to pursue our own glory. Because that's essentially what has happened in Genesis 3. They're pursuing their own glory. And we left off, or here's a quick summary of much of what we went through. Sin isn't doing just bad things. It's an attempt, foolish, yes, but it's an attempt to be like God. And we noted at the very end that it's a reversal of creation. This comes from Jeremiah 4:22 through 23, where the prophet Jeremiah is talking about the state of the world in which he is living. And remember, most of Jeremiah occurs either on the brink of exile or in the midst of exile. Notice what he says: "For my people are foolish, they know me not. They are stupid children, they have no understanding. They are wise, but only in doing evil. But how to do good they know not." Which, of course, is a really good way of understanding sin. That's just a really long definition of it. "I looked on the earth, and behold, it was without form and void, and out into the heavens, and they had no light." Sin brings darkness. It fractures creation. It breaks what God has designed to function. He's designed us to function within the standard of goodness, that he is God. It goes back to that concept of we are image bearers, right? That we are ones who bear the image of a creator, and we are created for a purpose that now is broken. You could also relate Jeremiah 4:22 and 23 to Isaiah 29:16, which we've spent a lot of time about the potter and the clay. But notice that first phrase: "You turn things upside down." Sin is really turning things upside down. It's this preposterous idea of the clay trying to resist its potter's will and wisdom and ways in which he wants that potter to work and to function. And that's, again, how we ought to see sin in the world and in our lives. Sin is image bearers outright denying the one who created them, one who fashioned them. And again, it sounds insane. It kind of sounds ludicrous, but that's really indeed how deranged sin is. It turns things upside down. If you're in Genesis, I hope you're still in Genesis 3, because I'm going to look at a couple of verses and then really explore more in Genesis 3 and then also Romans chapter 5. Because the point this morning that we have to understand is that, of course, sin must be judged. We see this right away. The effects of sin are felt. Adam and Eve feel shame. They try to clothe themselves. They try to cover up everything that they did that was wrong. They try to cover up themselves by sewing fig leaves together and whatnot. But then, of course, they have to confess. God finds them. As we know in verses 8 through 13, God finds them and he confronts them. And then everyone starts the blame game. "Oh, well, I ate because she told me to." And then, "Well, I ate because the snake told me to." So on and on it goes. There's blame going around. No one wants to take ownership of what happened. And then Lord judges sin. Look at verse 14. "The Lord God said to the serpent, Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all the beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. To the woman, so now he's turning to Eve, he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband. He shall rule over you. And to Adam, so now he's turning to Adam, and he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. And you shall eat of the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So we have a lot of judgment being laid down because of sin. It involves pain, it involves conflict, it involves misery, it involves hardship. Again, you notice what is being judged for Adam. The very thing that he was commissioned to do, which was to tend and keep the garden, is now also cursed. The very thing that he was sort of given by God to do, or ordained by God to do, is now going to be toilsome, laborsome. It's going to involve the thing that was supposed to bring him fulfillment is now bringing him frustration. And again, all of these curses can be all of this judgment can sort of be summed up, I think, just by this separation. Adam and Eve chose, when they chose to distrust in God's word and instead believing in the serpent's word, they chose to separate themselves again from their God-given identity. And this ultimately leads to actual separation. Genesis 3:24, at the very end of that chapter, he drove out the man. And at the east of the Garden of Eden, he placed a cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. The ultimate grief, yes, is knowing the consequences of their choice, knowing now that death has entered the world, that now death is going to come upon each of them, but also now this most critical consequence of this chapter that we've been looking at is the fact that now the way human beings relate to God is fundamentally altered. Remember, we looked at this, Genesis 3, verse 8, and this is God sort of finding Adam and Eve after they sinned, but we sort of inferred that this was a natural occurrence. There was this there was this beautiful, unhindered, sort of unashamed fellowship between God and man. That he would walk with them, he would commune with them, he would fellowship with Adam and Eve, and that they would be together in this beautiful, perfect fellowship and harmony. All of that is now broken. All of that is now changed. Man, God in his holiness, he cannot even entertain this unholy people now. So he drives them out. And now, if you don't have to go there, but you can turn there. This is what makes Genesis chapter 4 so pivotal. Because what are Cain and Abel doing at the beginning of chapter 4? They are communing with their Lord, and yet notice how they have to do it. Not like their parents did it. Now it has to be communing with sacrifice. Abel is bringing a sacrifice in order to, again, be an appeasing sacrifice to sort of break down those walls of separation and commune with their Creator. Again, this is sort of the basis for the rest of the history of humanity, is the fact that we need an atoning sacrifice in order to now reclaim that fellowship that we once enjoyed, that we were made for. Again, we were image bearers. The image is broken. We need someone to repair it. That's what's occurring here in this little moment. And all of this will help us understand salvation, which we're going to consider. But I think all of this sort of by way of introduction and review, helps us to consider this. Remember, we had two big questions regarding the doctrine of sin. The first one was, where does sin come from? Well, sin comes into the world, as we just looked at, Genesis 3. But the other big question I want to get to this morning is, how is sin passed down? Adam and Eve sinned, but how is sin passed down to us? This again relates to that question of souls that we've been sort of having in the background of our conversations for a couple weeks. This relates to that. This relates to the doctrine of original sin. Are we coming into this world as innocent little infants and then we choose to sin later on? All of this is very important for us to consider. So how is sin passed down? This is what we're going to talk about. How is sin transferred from one generation to another? That we could call this the transference of sin, if you will. I think the key text is, of course, Romans 5:12. So again, if you want to turn there, you can. I have it on the screen, but we'll read it together. Romans 5:12 is perhaps the most important verse for this concept, and Paul says this in the middle of this really important section of Romans. All of Romans is really important, but he says, therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man and death through sin, so death spread to all men because all sinned. And here, Paul very succinctly covers pretty much everything we've been talking about so far. And I think how you interpret this verse will really will really affect how you view sin and also likewise salvation. If you want to talk about origins, notice Paul mentions sin's origins. Sin came into the world through one man's decision. Again, that's what he's talking about. That's what he's referring to here. If you read the rest of Romans 5, he's really comparing Adam and Christ. And here he's saying through Adam's choice, sin came into the world. So here he puts all of the weight of rebellion on Adam's shoulders, and we can talk about that at a later date. But then he also mentions sin's judgment, because now we have to understand that the judgment of sin is death, ultimate separation. Separation from God. So we have the origins of sin. In a succinct way, we have the judgment of sin coming through death. And now, and also then at the end, we have the transference of sin because it's spread to all. In one succinct sentence, Paul covers everything that we've been talking about for 5 weeks up to this point. Paul is just a master at words. But I think, again, the really key word here is that word spread. So what does this word mean? Because this is really important for us to consider. It comes from the Greek word diarkomai, which means to pass along or to extend to. So he is essentially, again, saying that sin has extended to all men because of Adam. Through Adam. Through Adam, sin and death have been passed along. And he makes the same point in other places, not just Romans 5. He says the same thing in 1 Corinthians 15. Notice he says, for as by a man, again, Adam, came death, but as a man has come also the resurrection of the dead. Again, he's comparing Christ and Adam. And then at the end, for as in Adam all die, so in Christ all shall be made alive. So we have once again here this moment of realization that Adam's sin has spread to us. How so? That slide shouldn't have been there. We have 4 views here of transference. 4 views of looking at the way sin has been passed down. So we're going to go through them, and then if we have time, we'll kind of discuss them if you want to. The first view, the Pelagian view. So we have to start here. The Pelagian view, number 1. Pelagian view comes from a guy named, you might have guessed it, Pelagius. He was a British monk who lived in roughly the 3rd and the 4th centuries, and he was very, very well known in those days, and he was very insistent that everyone was born innocent. Remember that State of Theology survey that we referenced we referenced that last week, and I think, what was the stat? It was 61% of United States evangelicals would agree with Pelagius that everyone is born innocent, which should be concerning, as we'll see in a minute. Essentially, what Pelagius was arguing for, that since God was the creator of mankind's souls, there's that question, that conversation again, every soul has to be unstained by sin from the very start. And yet, when man chooses to sin, what is happening is he's following in the sin of Adam, which doesn't really do anything except make Adam little more than a bad example. Sin is following the bad example set down by Adam. And we become sinners when we follow the pitiful example of Adam, when we follow in his behavior. And again, Pelagius said, he argued that Adam wouldn't have died if he had not sinned. That was one of the tenets of his insistence here by this view. He said Adam would not have died, I'm sorry, let me back up. Forget what I just said in that second. Pelagius said that Adam would have died even if he hadn't sinned. That's what he was trying to argue for. Is that death wasn't a consequence of sin, death was just a part of creation. And he would have died no matter what, which, of course, you can go to Romans 6, you can go to Ezekiel, and several places in the Bible where it links specifically sin and death. Death comes in because of sin. But also, if we understand Pelagius' view, if everyone is born innocent, then we also have to understand that everyone has their own quote-unquote individual fall. And then the point of Pelagianism, if you will, is just to say that the gospel, the good news, doesn't become truly saving work. It becomes really just behavior modification, because if you're just trying to fight a bad example, what do you need? You just need good examples to follow. And therefore, it's within your own ability, it's within your own willpower, even, to choose the good example. That's what Pelagius was arguing for. And of course, this doesn't track with the scriptures. And in fact, Pelagius was condemned as a heretic, by the way, in the 400s. So with U.S. evangelicals agreeing with Pelagianism, they're agreeing with heresy, by the way. So we can just call it what it is. The second view is Arminian view. The second view of sin's transference. So we have Pelagius, sin just comes down through a bad example. We have the second view, is the Arminian view, which, as you might have guessed it, comes from a guy named Jacobus Arminius. He was a Dutch theologian that lived in the 1500s. And of course, he had a lot of conflict with Calvin. You can get into all that kind of stuff if you want to go down some rabbit trails of church history. But essentially, what he argued for was something similar in terms of, he liked Pelagius' stuff. And so if we had to summarize the Arminian view, we call it semi-Pelagianism, because he still argues for the fact that mankind chooses to sin. So mankind is still born innocent, mankind chooses to sin, but once mankind chooses to sin, that's when God passes along all of Adam's guilt. So it's almost like all of the guilt of Adam is imputed to those who choose to sin. So he's trying to have his cake and eat it too, essentially. He's trying to argue for man's innocence, but also say that all of the weight of the judgment of sin on Adam is now on us because we made the same choice. So all of that this is where it's different than Pelagius. Pelagius didn't argue for all of this guilt being transferred to us. There really was no connection between Adam's sin and our sin with Pelagius. But here, Arminius is trying to argue for the same thing. And the implication then is that mankind, again, Arminius is trying to argue for this, and then we can understand that mankind's hope is what? Just make better choices. Don't choose those things. Again, that really nullifies what the gospel is about. The third view is called the federal view. The federal view comes from, I'm going to mispronounce this guy's name, Johannes Coxius. He is another Dutch guy, but he's living in the 1600s. And this is I won't say it really was like, it was proposed by him, but I guess we could say organized by him. It became a really, really popular view of all of Reformed theologians. And essentially what this view does is it interprets Romans 5:12 as if Adam is mankind's representative, or we could say federal head. So just as we could say that he is sort of our stand-in. So Adam in the Garden of Eden is not just a historical person. He is, but he's also like a typical representative. He sort of stands in for us, for the rest of humanity. So Adam's choice to sin is our choice by proxy because he represents us. And this became a very, very popular view throughout all of church history. And I think there's a lot of biblical basis for this. I think there's a lot that you could argue for with this view. And I would not oppose anyone that clings to the idea that we are sinners because of our representative, that we are sinners also because Adam is our representative in the garden. The fourth view, really quick, and then I'll pause for questions or discussion really quick. But the fourth view is the Augustinian view, which, of course, as you might imagine, was developed by Augustine. Augustine, by the way, was sort of the opponent of Pelagius in the 3rd and 4th century, so they had a lot of times where they went toe-to-toe. Augustine, of course, you might know him as St. Augustine of Hippo. He was a bishop in North Africa, a very, very popular defender of Scripture and doctrine and orthodoxy. What he argued for is that humanity was a participant in Adam's sin, because as it says in Scripture, as the Scriptures we read, that we were, quote, in Adam. And how is that possible? How are we in Adam? Well, I want to go to another place. So just pause thinking about the doctrine of sin and go to Hebrews chapter 7 really quick. This is kind of where he formulates his view. And by the way, not to bury the lead, I think there's a lot of credence to what Augustine was saying here with this particular view. So look at Hebrews chapter 7, look at verse 9. Just so you remember, if you remember what the writer of Hebrews is talking about here in this particular section, he's laying the foundation. Again, Hebrews is an anonymous book. It's essentially a sermon. It's a 12 or 13-part sermon where, and essentially, he's trying to prove to you that Jesus is better. Jesus is better than this. Jesus is better than that. He's better than the priesthood. He's better than Moses. He's better than Joshua. He's better than the angels. On and on he goes. Here he's establishing the fact that Jesus has a better priesthood. And in so doing, he refers to that priest, Melchizedek, who is this very obscure figure that only appears in a couple of references, mainly Genesis chapter 14. And he's trying to show that even Abraham and all of his lineage then was deferring, showed deference, showed honor, and paid homage to Melchizedek. They acknowledged him as superior. And he's arguing for the fact that when Abraham did this, so did all of Abraham's descendants. Even Levi, who is the one through whom the priesthood comes. So look at what he says in Hebrews chapter 7, look at verse number 9, where the writer, let's back up to verse 6. He says, but this man, so he's talking about Melchizedek, who does not have his descent from them, received tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. So that's a direct referral or reference to Genesis 14, by the way. And then he says, it is beyond dispute that the inferior blessed the superior. In the one case, so there's blessings happening and everyone is acknowledging that Melchizedek is this superior priest. In the one case, tithes are received by mortal men, but in another case, by the one whom it is testified that he lives. Notice what he says here, verse 9. One might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him. So notice what he's saying. He's arguing for the superiority of Melchizedek's priesthood. How? By the fact that Abraham is paying tithes through him. And then he's also saying that it wasn't just Abraham, but all of Abraham's descendants too. Even Levi did. Because Levi was, quote, in Abraham. Oh, I forgot I had this on here. There we go. For he was still in the loins of his ancestor Abraham. So when Levi's great-grandfather paid homage to Melchizedek, Augustine was using this as rationale to say that so did, the Hebrew writer was saying this, that so did Levi, and the same argument is being made for humanity. He's using the same rationale to say that just as when Adam sinned, we were, quote, in Adam, therefore we sinned too. We were a participant in the sin of the garden, and this is how that verse is applied when it says that all men are now under the curse of death because, quote, all men sinned. And I think, by the way, again, I think that this is I think one of the better interpretations of Romans 5, if you ask me which view I would subscribe to, I would probably fall within the Augustinian view. I can definitely agree with you if you want to interpret Romans 5 through the federal view that Adam is just our representative. I don't think there's any biblical basis for the Arminian or the Pelagian view. Does anyone have any questions or comments before we proceed and kind of close out some of these themes? Or maybe that was just like too much stuff. Yeah, great.
Just to be clear, that the term born with a sin nature would be the same as conceived with sin nature?
Yes, correct.
Because, obviously you just preached about Jacob and Esau.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, don't think of just when someone, what they're saying, conceived in it, they're saying born innocent, but also conceived innocent, those other views or whatever, that basically they're saying that mankind is entering into this world either in their mom's womb or when they enter the world even after that, they're innocent. And we would argue against that. I would hope that, well, at least that's what I'm trying to argue for, is essentially that from conception, man is a sinner, not somewhere down the line. Doesn't matter how far you want to put that down the line, it doesn't really matter, that window. But what I think is clear from the scriptures is the fact that mankind is conceived in sin, is conceived as a sinner. That there is no juncture, there is no point at which man goes from not being a sinner to being a sinner, either through anything, either just feeling the weight of something or his own decision. Mankind is a sinner because I would again argue, just as Augustinian argued, that we were, quote, in Adam. And then, because I think this is a helpful way to think about this, is when we get to here. And I think this is what enhances this verse where it says that when Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness and image. Because now what? The image is broken. The image that was put into him by God when he formed him out of the dust of the ground and he breathed into his nostrils and he became a living soul. Yes, all of that is still true. He still bears the image of God, but the image of God, the imago Dei, is fractured. It's cracked. It's dented because of sin. And now everyone after him that is being fathered by him is bearing that same broken image. So everyone that is coming into this world is conceived in sin. As I think Summer brought this up last week, Psalm 51:5, behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. David talking. David confessing. He's confessing the fact that this has been true since he was conceived. And I think this helps us understand our own sin nature, because I think very clearly, contrary to the popular opinion that we come into this world innocent, I think the Bible affirms just the opposite. This, of course, we could say it like this, that we aren't sinners because we sin. So we don't become sinners once we choose to sin. No, we are sinners we are sinners, therefore we sin. It's in our nature. It's in our DNA. It's in us to choose opposite of what God would have us to choose. This is the concept of original sin, which says that from basically the moment of conception onward, man is a sinner. We enter into this life with a sinful nature, and this curse of death on us. This comes from that really familiar phrase. Maybe, I don't know who in the world said this, but it's been attributed to like everyone under the sun. But the heart of the human problem is the problem of the human heart. That's getting to the nature of the issue of the doctrine of sin. We can think about it in Genesis 6:5, where God saw that the wickedness of man was great, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. It's coming from out of him. All the generations of humans that have been born, again, to quote Genesis 5, in the image of Adam, are now just abounding in sin. Or as it says in Jeremiah 17, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can know it? And again, this comes from also not just the Old Testament, but the New Testament, as Jesus makes that statement in Mark 7. We won't go there for sake of time, but just this is where he makes that argument again. I think we mentioned it briefly last time, where he talks about how all of the things that the Pharisees were looking to clean up, he's basically saying, you're cleaning the outside. The problem is the inside. Sin comes from within, he says. All of the evils, all of the atrocities, all of the wickedness that we see in this life, it's not just because of an environment or whatever. It comes from within mankind's heart and soul. Sin comes from within. So all of what that means then, all of this sets us up to understand the doctrine of salvation, which we're going to get to next week, because in and of ourselves, we can't just make better choices to make things better, to make ourselves better. We cannot and will not make the right choice. Romans 3 talks about this, that mankind doesn't seek after God, doesn't know God, doesn't want God. It's because it's in our nature to sin, permeates our entire being. So therefore, what we can understand that is that when the gospel comes, it comes as an announcement of a deeper fix. It doesn't just fix our behavior. It doesn't address the problem of making right choices. It addresses the heart of our problem. That's why it's called, that's why Jesus terms it when he's talking to Nicodemus as what? New birth. He doesn't just need more wisdom from some ancient rabbi on how to make better life choices because he can so he can resist the lure of sin. No, he needs to be remade. He needs to be reborn. He needs a new heart, which is exactly what Jesus offers in the gospel. Yeah, it's a spiritual concept that's being applied to a physical reality, but he's saying that this is what happens when you trust and believe in Jesus. You are reborn, you are remade, and it's as a sign of, you believe that by faith, and that at the end of all things, you're going to be remade, given a new body, one that's glorified. All of that is being sort of encapsulated in the doctrine of salvation, where it addresses our true problem. So again, this is an overview again of hamartiology, the doctrine of sin, that sets us up for soteriology, the doctrine of salvation. And I think again, it's important for us to keep in mind that what the gospel addresses is that deep issue, not just outward issues. Does anyone have any comments or thoughts about the doctrine of sin as we've covered it the last several weeks, or just anything that we've covered here this morning? Yeah, Natalie.
That's why Jesus has pure, holy blood. And that's why he was the ultimate sacrifice.
Yes.
Our blood is tainted with sin.
Yes.
And so I was just thinking, like, at conception, that's when we sin.
Yes, exactly. And that's why, again, I think Pastor Eric sort of made this point the last week or maybe the week before about the fact that this is what enhances and sort of intensifies the virgin birth, and the fact that there is that the reason why that's so important, because there is not this mixture of sin nature or anything like that. He is sinless, and he is sinless because he is God come down in the flesh. Anyone have another thought? Eric does.
Yeah. So Psalm 51 we mentioned earlier, and that's a really good psalm to sum up everything, because we use verse 5. But behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and sin did my mother conceive me. And then the most famous verse of Psalm 51 is actually 5 verses later, which is verse 10, where it says, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. So in that same psalm, David's basically saying, I'm sin, I'm born in sin. It's a heart problem, so I need a new heart, create in me a clean heart. And it's really cool when you tie it together. It pretty much summarizes this whole thing right here, just in that one psalm.
Yeah, that's a great, we should have included that, because that really addresses the whole thing that we're getting at, where the promise of God's mercy, the promise of the gospel, addresses everything: heart, body, mind, and soul. And it's going to, that's what the promise of that good news is remaking all of that, repairing all of that, repairing and restoring the image that's broken by sin and our choice to continue to sin. So That's what we're setting up to talk about next week. So come back next week where we'll finish out this subsection on man, sin, and salvation. We'll give, again, a bird's eye view of what it means to understand the doctrine of salvation. And we'll get as deep as we can, and then we'll see where we go from there. But thank you so much for this morning. Let me pray, and we'll be dismissed. Okay, we are set to close out this subsection that we have been going through in our Ologies series. We've been going through these three different ologies, anthropology, hamartiology, and now this morning we're going to get into soteriology. And yes, as I've said before, this is not going to be a comprehensive look at soteriology. If that were the case, we would be here for many more weeks. But what we're going to do this morning, what I hope to accomplish after we get through a quick review of last week, but also as we get into this week, is to give you a really broad overview of what soteriology is, the doctrine of salvation, how we can understand it. There's going to be some things that we may not cover, like some of the varying theories of like the doctrine of atonement and stuff like that. We can get into that if you would like later on. But really what I want to do is how can we understand salvation, especially based on what we've been going through so far, as we've looked at what makes up a man, what makes up a woman, what makes up human beings, and then also what sin actually is. How can we understand the salvation that God has put into place through his son Jesus? So that's kind of where we're going to go. But last week we covered a lot of ground. We turned our attention to hamartiology, really specifically focused on that, and we spent some time talking about the doctrine of sin. We especially emphasized the nature of sin, and as we've discussed for a couple weeks now, sin, as we've seen based on Genesis chapter 3 and onward, is really distrust of God. And it's a distrust that leads to obedience. It's not just the disobedience that's sinful. There's something that preempts that. There's something that comes before that. You're distrusting in what God's word has either said or revealed or spoken or promised, and instead going a different route. You're believing something else as opposed to what God has already spoken. And this distrust and disobedience, as we saw last week, ultimately leads to death. That's what we've seen through the course of especially the fall in Genesis chapter 3. We also saw that sin is basically rebellion. It's the belief that it's believing in this lie that mankind can make his own shalom, that Hebrew word for peace. And it's not, as we've said, this Hebrew word for peace, shalom, is all encompassing. It's this notion of fulfillment, of completeness. It's like a glass underneath a water faucet, and it's all the way to the brim. There's nothing that's lacking. And the idea of sin is that mankind can make that for himself. He can create that for himself. And again, this goes back to the original sin in the garden that was tempting Eve there in Genesis 3, which was, you can be like God. That is the essential temptation, was what? You can make your own shalom. You can make this on your own. You don't need to submit. You don't need to abide by the authority, by the standard, by the word of promise that God has already given you. You can make it up for yourself. Of course, this is a lie. We saw how this was deceitful, that this didn't actually bring about any sense of fulfillment. It actually brought about the worst of everything that Adam and Eve could have imagined. And that's because it comes from, I just highlighted this verse because it's where Christ is speaking to the Pharisees, and he literally says that the devil, Satan, that ancient serpent, is the father of lies. This is it's Satan, the devil, spewing deceit, and he cannot be trusted. And of course we saw all of the consequences that come from that, because of course sin must be judged. God is holy, he's supremely righteous, and in his righteousness, sin, anything that is anti-righteous, if you will, must be judged. There are consequences, and of course the way we can understand the consequences of sin is death and separation. If you look at the latter half of Genesis 3, that's really what it's covering. There's lots of particular consequences that are relayed through the curses that the Lord lays down on the man, on the woman, on the serpent, etc. But essentially, what you can narrow them down to is now death has come, but also now you are separated. The fellowship that was enjoyed in Eden is no longer enjoyed. Now mankind is kind of held at arm's length, so to speak. And this is the ultimate consequence of sin and mankind's decision. Last week also, we spent a lot of time covering how sin is transferred, how sin spreads to one generation to the other, because of course this is what we've been talking a lot about with regard to this conversation regarding our souls, regarding our sin nature, regarding the judgment of sin. How is this passed down from one generation to the next? And this is the big verse, Romans 5:12, where Paul says, "Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, so death spread to all men because all sinned." So this is the key verse as Paul is explaining here. He gets into not only the origins of sin right in this verse, the judgment of sin, but also now the transference of sin, how sin is passed down. He says it's spread to all men. Literally that word means it's extended to, or it's passed along to everyone. And we examined 4 views of how sin is transferred. Pop quiz, who can remember one of the 4? Everyone gets a 0. No, it's okay. So one of them was, we looked at 4 different views. One of them was, what do you think? You weren't here,
No,
I don't think.
wasn't.
But we'll take a guess.
Didn't you say genetics, how our DNA is corrupted?
Yeah, that'll probably be, it's similar to that. That's the Augustinian view, which is the view that I actually would adhere to, but there's 3 other ones. What do you think? The Arminian view, which was sort of put into place by Jacobus Arminius, who kind of believes that mankind is innocent, and when he sins, when he chooses, mankind is born, he emerges into life innocent, he chooses to sin. Once that happens, all of the guilt of Adam is put upon him. The other view, the federal view, look at Megan, she's on top of it. The federal view understands that mankind is a sinner, but he's a sinner because Adam was his representative. The federal view, I think, is very biblically sound. You can make a good argument for it. It's understanding it in terms of Adam was humanity's representative in the garden, and because he sinned, that is passed to us because he represents us. The other view, Pelagian view, yeah, the Pelagian view, it's sort of the precursor to the Arminian view, which is just that mankind is born innocent, and actually Adam's sin is really just a bad example. His sin isn't transferred to us. His guilt isn't transferred to us. It's just he sets a bad example, and when we sin, we're following a bad example. I would say, obviously, clearly, hopefully you can gather this, the Arminian view and the Pelagian view are not biblically sound, I don't think, at all, even though they come from theologians who were trying to make a case for it from Scripture. I definitely would agree with the federal view, but more specifically, I think the Augustinian view is the view that I think mostly keeps in line with Scripture as well. As Augustine made the case that we are sinners, not just because Adam represents us, but because we were, quote, in Adam from the beginning. And we saw a verse in Hebrews 7 where it was talking about how Levi was, quote unquote, in Abraham. And that idea, I think, helps us understand the doctrine of original sin. We emerge into this life from conception. We are sinners. There's not a moment in when we are not sinners. We are born sinners. We are conceived sinners. And that's where we get into that. See, a lot of people kind of sort of resist the idea of what Martin Luther talks about in that book that he has, The Bondage of the Will, where he's saying we don't have free will. No, that's not what he's talking about. He's saying that our will is bound to sin. That's what he's referring to. It's not that we don't have a free will. It's just that if we do have a free will, it's always going to choose sin. That's the case he's making. And that's the case that he's arguing for. And you can see that also from Romans chapter 3, where it talks about no one is good, no one is righteous, no one seeks after God, where Paul talks about in Romans 3. But essentially, that's what we've been talking about, that all of Adam's sins and all of the consequences for Adam's sin are ours. They're transferred to us because we are, quote, in Adam. And this is kind of where we got to that really famous quote that I forgot to put in here, which is just that the heart of the human problem is the problem of the human heart. That's where that comes from. That's how deep our problem is. And this is where we ended, which allows us, I think, to move this morning into the doctrine of soteriology, because we have, obviously, the problem of sin is a problem. The problem of sin is something that is fracturing humanity. It's fracturing creation, as we saw. It ruins relationships. It ruins what human beings are for. And everything from there, it's kind of like just a splinter. It's a spider web. Everything just splinters off of that. And everything is being damaged because of that sinful decision. So as we look at soteriology, just breaking this down, it comes from two words, of course, soteria in the Greek, which means salvation, logos, word, discourse, or study. So this really is the study of salvation. It's studying the way in which God has determined to save sinful human beings. And the way I like to summarize this is that salvation, the doctrine of salvation, soteriology, is God's solution to the problem of sin. How is God going to solve the problem that mankind has put into the world, the problem of sin that mankind has chosen, that now has fractured what God has called very good? This, in very many ways, could be said to be the whole entire theme of the Bible. If you were with us, or if you've listened to some of those series that we did on Sunday nights, we talked about biblical theology in the past and understanding the Bible as essentially a story. And in fact, I think that's really what we could understand all of Scriptures to be about. All 66 books, I would say, are tied together by essentially God telling this story. That's why we have the books that we have. We don't have it because they tell us good history, even though they do. We don't have these books because they tell us certain geographical things or moral things or traditional things or societal things. No, the thread of the Bible is the salvation story that God is telling through His Son, Jesus Christ. And that's why, by the way, this is slightly a tangent, but I think hopefully it's helpful to you. That's why, by the way, when you're reading historical books, it'll sweep over parts of history. Why is that? Well, it's not because the Bible is a bad historical book. It's because part of the history that it's telling is telling the history of salvation. It's telling the history, of really important history, of how God has determined from the foundations of the world to put into place the way in which this problem of sin could be remedied, could be fixed. So now we can understand it that basically, for God so loved the world, that's that first phrase of John 3:16. I like the way that other translations translate this, because it literally means, for God loved the world in this way. And I think in a way, you could make this sort of like the Bible's subtitle. If you're opening up the Bible, here's the subtitle: God loved the world in this way. Because that's what the Bible is going to tell you all about. It's going to tell you about how God is going to repair His creation. And again, this kind of goes back to what we harped on when we were talking about the image of God in us, the Imago Dei, and talking about the idea that, imagine that concept between a potter, and he's using clay to form some sort of vessel. Whereas in my case, or in Natalie's case, when we were doing a pottery class, when we messed up, we didn't try to fix it. We just got a new hunk of clay. That's what, when me and Natalie were there and we messed up on whatever we were doing, and the supervisor, the teachers that were in that pottery class, they're like, "Oh, it's too far gone. Let's just get you a new one." Think about that in the same way in which the fact is that God's creation, that's not what happens. He doesn't just go, "Oh, everything's messed up, everything's screwed up, I guess I better start over again." No, He remakes what He's already made. That's His promise. The promise of salvation is a promise of repairing and remedying and remaking what God has already spoken into existence. And he's going to, sort of burn off all of the sin. And he's going to do that through his holiness and righteousness. But it's not it's not like our notion of a potter getting frustrated because the clay isn't doing what it's supposed to, and so he's going to crumple it all up, throw it away, and start over again. Actually, no, God is going to work with that clay and remake it into what he has already designed it to be. And that's the story that God is telling. That's the story that the Bible is telling. And the important thing that comes out of all this is that since we are not born innocent, since we are not just sinners because we choose to sin somewhere down the line, we are sinners in our hearts from deep down into who we are. We are sinners. We need something deeper than just a message of behavior modification. We need something better and deeper than just making better choices. That actually won't help us. That actually won't free us. That's why, by the way, that notion of that comes out of Pelagius, which is Pelagianism, or the other one that's slightly different, but just as detrimental, semi-Pelagianism. Both of them insist upon the same thing: that we aren't that bad. We just need better we need better examples on how to live better lives. It essentially makes the gospel a message of morality and ethics that actually doesn't really address the root problem. The root problem that salvation addresses is what the gospel comes to offer. It's so much better. Why? Well, I like to think about it this way: God's solution to fix the problem of sin is to repair his image bearers from the inside out. That's why, by the way, he has that conversation with Nicodemus in John chapter 3, and he talks about new birth. If we needed just sort of behavior modification, he wouldn't talk about a new spiritual birth. He would just talk about, why aren't you doing what you're supposed to? I've already given you what you're supposed to do. Let me give you a little sort of extra grace boost, and that'll help you. No, he's talking about new birth. Why? Because we need a new nature. We don't just need better decisions or better choices or the ability to make better choices. We need a new nature because we have a sinful nature that we cannot get out from under, that we were born with. Because of who we are as human beings, as we have a fractured image, that imago Dei is dented, it is tainted by sin. And this, again, is what the gospel offers. This is what is offered by grace through Jesus Christ as he comes into this world, is transformation, new birth, repairing that image that was broken. And I want you to see that. I think this is really powerful, especially as we've gone from looking at how man was created in the image of God, how that image was tainted because of mankind's decision making, and now every sort of human being, though they still are made in the image of God, they still have the imago Dei. It's an image that is sort of warped, it's tainted, it's perverted because of sin, and this is precisely what Jesus has come to fix. Notice what Paul says here. This is in Colossians chapter 5. He says, put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you. And then jumping to verse 10, and put on the new self. Well, notice this, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator. Part of this process that God has put into motion, this big encompassing process called salvation, which it covers a lot of things as we're going to see. This process is all about being God's creatures, even God, the sinners, sinning human beings, being renewed in the image of the one who created them. Image, same word. It's that word icon. It's that word that means the imago Dei. Paul says the same thing in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, where he says, just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, so the image of Adam, we shall also bear the image of the man of heaven. And this is coming within that conversation that Paul is talking about in 1 Corinthians 15, where he's talking about the resurrection, talking about how the resurrection of Christ is ours by faith, and this is what secures the fact that we, by faith, are being remade, bearing the image of the man of heaven, the image, the imago that Christ has come to repair, that he has come to fix, that he has come to remedy, to make right again. And I think one of the better verses, or we could say one of the best ones about this, is Romans 8:29, where he says, "For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers." And again, this is what God has put into place. That those that he is saving, he's conforming back into the image. He's repairing the image. He's fixing the Imago Dei. He's restoring that icon that God had originally created humanity with. The image of God that means we belong to our Creator. And this is what we can understand salvation to be about then. Salvation is all about being made like Jesus. That's sort of the point. It's going from death. We are sinners, as Paul says in Ephesians chapter 2. We are sinners, caught dead in trespasses and sins, and we are raised to life by Jesus, by grace, by faith. And as we are raised to life by Jesus, he imparts his Spirit, who then does the work of conforming us to that image. It's an image that, yes, we are going to receive in fullness. So at the end of all the, I'm kind of jumping ahead, but at the end of all time, at the end of all things, this is all going to come to fruition. It's going to be consummated, if you will, in which we will have truly the sort of the full image of God in us. But even now, by faith, this is happening by faith, and we are living by faith in the image that God has already promised to us. And this is how we understand the way I think the Christian life is so powerful. That we're living right now based on what God has promised is ours already, and we are living right now based on the image of God's Son in us, because this is what spreads the image of God to others. It's what spreads the gospel to others. That's why we can't just, do whatever we want once we're saved, because this is God's image being put into us by his word and by his Spirit. Okay, so now we have to ask a couple questions. How is this possible? This kind of gets to some of the particulars about the doctrine of salvation. How does this happen? How does God pull this off? Well, of course, we could just say the gospel. Hey, Pastor Brad, that sounds like basic gospel stuff. Maybe, but there's nothing truly basic about this, because I think this helps us understand how all of these different doctrines and truths are interconnected into this big picture that God is telling us through the Scriptures, the big picture of salvation. So the way in which God pulls this off, if you will, is that he sends his Son to the earth in the person of Jesus to show us what it means to bear the image of God. And look at what Paul says again in 1 Corinthians 15. As he's talking about Christ within this chapter, he's talking about Christ a lot in this particular book. Notice what he says, "For as by a man came death," Adam, of course, that's pretty self-explanatory. But by a man came death, by a man has come also the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ shall all be made alive. Thus it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam, notice that phrase, became a life-giving spirit. I'm trying not to steal some of my thunder, because I'm going to talk about this morning in this morning's sermon. But essentially, this is how God is remedying the problem of sin. He's sending his Son, who is God in the flesh, Jesus Christ, to be, quote-unquote, the perfect man. To live this life in perfect righteousness, a life that adheres to the Imago Dei in its fullness. This is what Jesus' incarnation is all about. He's fulfilling what Adam failed to do. This is why why Paul is making this really powerful argument here that we have a quote-unquote first Adam, and now Jesus is the last Adam. He's the second Adam, the true and better Adam. He's Adam as he should have been. because he's not going to fail. He's not going to fall prey to Satan's devices. And I'm stepping on my toes because, by the way, I'm talking about Jesus being tempted in the wilderness in Matthew 4. But that's essentially what's happening. He's not falling prey to what originally was the first Adam was tempted to fall prey to. And again, this is where we have to dive even a little bit deeper, because if it was just about living perfectly, then Jesus of Nazareth is little more than, we could say, like a guru who comes to show the world how to live. That's part of why he came, to live perfectly, to live righteously, to adhere to the image of God. But as we said, sin is more than just bad choices, which means we need more than just a good example. You see, the problem of sin demands that someone pay the price. And this, by the way, I think is where we get to that really amazing point that so often gets skipped over at the end of Genesis 3. Genesis 3:21, when Adam and Eve are being pushed out of the garden, what does God do? And the Lord God made for Adam and his wife garments of skins and clothed them. Right in the middle of this scene where Adam and Eve are being expelled from Eden, in the immediate aftermath of this fall, God provides clothing for them, notably by the shedding of blood. 2 animals, we imagine. It doesn't tell us what animals were killed in this particular instance, but shedding of blood leads to covering, which leads to fellowship and communion. And again, as we said, the fellowship and communion that was imagined, or that was sort of put into place in the garden, is no longer in place. Now there's more involved. There has to be an atonement. There has to be a sacrifice for those sins paid. And that's how God and man can commune together again. That's how God and man can have that fellowship restored. And this reveals a very powerful pattern for the rest of history. Not just Israel's history, all of human history. It kind of emerges out of this particular moment. Because in order to restore the image that was broken, in order to restore the fellowship that was fractured by sin, there has to be a sacrifice. Hebrews 9, this is where we get into more of this. Hebrews 9:22. Indeed, under the law, almost everything is purified with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. There is no restoration of fellowship and relationship without the shedding of blood. You see this right from the very beginning. And this is why, by the way, all of Israel's religion was marked by so many sacrifices. Why were there so many sacrifices? Trying to imagine the tabernacle or the temple is a really violent thing to imagine. There's all kinds of just viscera and violence and bloodshed that's in the temple because there's always sacrifices going on. There's all kinds of offerings being placed on altars. And they were all in their own way they were symbolizing, of course, they were supposed to appease and atone for man's sin. Of course, we know. Oh, I forgot to put that verse in here. Sorry. Of course, we know that no amount of blood from any animal could actually work. So, the blood of these 2 animals didn't actually restore what Adam and Eve lost. It symbolized the restoration. Just as every sort of lamb, every bull, every goat that was sacrificed in the thousands of years after this moment, they didn't actually do what they symbolized they were doing. They symbolized that by faith that this is what God was going to do. But as if you want to turn there, you can. But that's what happens at the beginning of Hebrews chapter 10, where the writer of Hebrews tells us what? What does he tell us? I'll just read it. I always try and pretend I have all of the Bible memorized, and unfortunately, I don't. Hebrews 10, he says, "For since the law has but a shadow of the good things to come, instead of the true form of these realities, it can never, by the same sacrifices that are continually offered every year, make perfect those who draw near." He's saying, these animal sacrifices, they symbolize, they have, as he says, they're a shadow of the good things that's coming, but they don't actually do what they're saying that they're going to do, because they can't. And as he says, otherwise, would they not have ceased to be offered, since the worshippers, having once been cleansed, would no longer have any consciousness of sins? He's making a really valid argument. Hey, if these sacrifices actually worked, then why are we having to do them all the time? Verse 3, but in these sacrifices there is a reminder of sins every year, for it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. It's not about the animal, it's about what the animal symbolizes. This shedding of blood symbolizes how the problem of sin is going to be fixed. Because sinful human beings sin constantly, which means the sacrifices are needed continually. And this is what God in Christ steps out of heaven to accomplish. Hebrews 9:26, for then he would have had to suffer repeatedly since the foundation of the world. But as it is, he has appeared once for all at the end of all ages to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself, to put it away. This is what Christ is coming. He's, yes, fulfilling righteousness by living perfectly, but he's also putting away sin by dying as our representative. Hebrews 10, verse 10, and by that will we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. Again, once for all, notice that phrase. But when Christ had offered for all time a single sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God, waiting from that time until his enemies should be made a footstool for his feet. For by a single offering he has perfected for all time those who are being sanctified. This is how we can understand the solution, God's solution to the problem of sin. He sends his Son to live as the perfect representative of mankind. He comes to live as the perfect Adam, if you will, the last Adam, that actually and finally fulfills what the first Adam failed to do. But he also allows himself to die as a sacrifice for sins, thereby appeasing and atoning all of the sins of humanity. This is how we can understand the doctrine of salvation. And of course, we know all of this is true, and this is kind of what gets to the heart of what the apostles were preaching about, is that we know this is true because of the resurrection. That's why, by the way, whenever they're preaching in the book of Acts, we've talked about this a number of occasions, why they're always mentioning the resurrection, because this is sort of like the seal, the stamp of approval on all the other stuff. We know that this is true because we saw the resurrected Lord, which means all this other stuff is true too. And so, what this is getting at, if you really want some like technical things, if you want, is that this is what we can call the active and passive obedience of the Son of God. And this is what the gospel offers. He's not just living up to a better example for us. He's also taking away sin for us. So I'm going to define this for you. Jesus' active obedience is his perfect obedience to God's law. This is him fulfilling all righteousness as the last Adam. We're going to talk about that this morning a little bit. Jesus' passive obedience is his paying the penalty for our failure to live up to the law. This is what we just sort of surveyed in Hebrews, where he is obeying to the point of death, even the death of the cross, as it says in Philippians. And the point is, we need both. We don't just need a good example, we need a sacrifice. And we don't just need someone to take away our sins, we need someone to give us righteousness in the place of our sins. This is what Jesus has come to offer. This is what the Son of God has come to be for our sake. 2 Corinthians 5:20, for our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. This is, I have a couple other verses, but I want to get to the end of this so we can have a little discussion if we need to. This is a really comprehensive, really bird's eye view of the doctrine of salvation, in which we can understand the righteousness of God is given to us through Jesus, who repairs the image that was broken by sin. This is what he's doing. This is what the gospel announces. The image that was broken has been repaired because of Christ. This is what, and all of the things that we often associate with the doctrine of salvation go along with this. This is what it means to be justified. We are declared righteous. It's a legal statement, so to speak, of God because of Christ. We are declared justified because of him, because of what he has already accomplished in his perfect life. This is what it means to be redeemed. We talk about that word a lot. You see that word a lot in Scripture. That falls under this big umbrella of salvation. It means that we are, as it says in 1 Corinthians 6, we are bought with a price. Literally, that's what the phrase means, bought with a price, and that price is Jesus' own body and blood. All of this, it tells us what it means to be forgiven. All of our wrongdoing, all of our sin, all of our hatred, all of our violence, all of our wretchedness is covered and erased because of Jesus. This is what it means to be reconciled. Ephesians 2:13. But now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. Because of Jesus, who's repairing the image, that exile that Adam and Eve sort of endured because of their sin at the end of Genesis 3, that is no longer true because now we are brought near. The estrangement, so to speak, the standoffishness of God because of our sin is now no more because of Christ. Now we are brought close. Now we are brought near. And we are so near, in fact, that He sends His Spirit to dwell in us. That's how close it is. And all of this is included in what it means to be saved. And the whole time, of course, this is what the Spirit of God is applying to our hearts. 2 Corinthians 3:18, and we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed, notice that, into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. The Spirit of Christ is applying all of these things to us while we are here on this earth in this life. He's transforming us into this image, the image that Christ has come to repair, and He's doing so as we are being regenerated, as we are being sanctified, as we commune with Christ through His Word. And of course, this brings us back to Romans 8:29, that we were being conformed into the image of God's Son. And the point is this, is that all of these things that we've just really glazed over really fast, they necessitate someone else to make it possible, let alone to make it happen. That's the point of the doctrine of salvation. No matter which sort of little road or side road that you go on, if you want to take a way deeper dive into the doctrine of soteriology, the point is to understand that we trust in God's Word that this is true. This is why salvation has to be by faith alone. We can't change our own nature. We are humans conceived in sin. Our will is bound to sin. We're not going to make the right choices. Pelagianism and semi-Pelagianism, it's a non-starter. We're not going to make the right choices on our own. We need a word of hope and salvation from outside of us, which is what the gospel is. And this is why it has to be by faith alone. And this is what salvation also includes. I wanted to include this and I forgot to include a slide, but I'll just read this and then we'll close or open up for questions, because there's a great way to understand the doctrine of salvation coming from the book of Ezekiel. I love this passage. Write it down, Ezekiel 36:33-36, because notice what the prophet Ezekiel says about restoration and about salvation. Notice he says this, Ezekiel 36:33. Thus says the Lord God, on the day that I cleanse you from all your iniquities, I will cause the cities to be inhabited, and the waste places shall be rebuilt. And the land that was desolate shall be tilled, instead of being the desolation that it was in the sight of all who pass by. And they will say, this land that was desolate has become, notice this phrase, like the Garden of Eden. And the waste and the desolate and the ruined cities are now fortified and inhabited. Then the nations that are left all around you shall know that I am the Lord. I have rebuilt the ruined places and replanted that which was desolate. I am the Lord. I have spoken, and I will do it. You want to talk about God's sort of seal of approval on the fact that He's the one that makes all of this happen. There it is. It comes from the mouth of Ezekiel. And I love that phrase, that part of God's salvation, His restoration of everything, includes making it like it was in the Garden of Eden. Restoration of the image, restoration of creation, fixing what was broken, getting rid of all iniquity and sin just like it was at the start. This is what he's doing, even in our midst right now. He's expunging, he's expelling all the sin that's in us through his word and by his Spirit. And he's doing so in the world too. And at the end of all things, that's what is going to be accomplished. That's what's going to be effected. Is that all of creation that we see is going to be made like it was in Eden. And this is the ultimate hope that the gospel gives us, is that this is what is promised to us in Christ. This is the hope that we have in the salvation of God, God's solution to the problem of sin. That was a really, really brief, fast overview of the doctrine of soteriology. Does anyone have any comments or questions that got stirred up in the midst of this discussion this morning? Well, that's good. Hopefully you understood everything. The one thing that I will say, encourage you to study, of course, is just for kicks and giggles maybe, is studying the different theories of atonement. You'll see that. That's something that I was going to get into, but it was just... maybe it's just for your own time, or I can explain it at a later date. There's ideas of God's atonement, Christ's atonement on the cross. It means this or it means that, and that's where some people we would say we affirm the substitutionary penal atonement of Christ. That he's doing that as a payment, sort of. He's paying for our sins on the cross. That's kind of what that means there. There's other ways to view what's happening on the cross. And some people get really hot and bothered by different interpretations, and some people are like, well, we don't like that because that looks like God is that's what the modern idea, that they don't like the penal substitutionary atonement because it looks like God is too violent. Look, he's rejoicing in his son dying. Well, we have to understand God's law to understand. But anyways, there's lots of other ones. Christus Victor, this is the original doctrine of atonement that was sort of formed and sort of propagated by the early church in the early couple centuries of the church. But there's others, and I challenge you just to explore them. Just know that if you were to ask me what one matters, I would say I think they're all true, but there's like a pie chart, and like some of them have a smaller slice of the pie than others. It's not to say, I think when it's talking about different theories of atonement, we get into a bad little ditch if we're saying it has to be this one and all the other ones are bad. No, I think all of them are valid, mostly, generally speaking. It's just they're not as valid as other ones, if that makes any sense. But any other questions or comments? Okay, next week we're going to start the next segment of this series. Our brother Matt Shively is going to be getting into the doctrine of the church, ecclesiology. And we're excited for that. And then we get into eschatology. After Matt Shively, Pastor Eric will be doing eschatology. So be in prayer for that. And then we're almost done with this systematic theology series, which is really exciting, but also really thrilling because who knows where we're going to go next with this Sunday school class. But I'm excited for that. So be in prayer for that. Doctrine of the church, and then the doctrine of the end times after that. So let's pray, and we'll be dismissed this morning.